Chapter 18. Omnia Cum Deo. The industrial use of semen will revolutionize human society. Aleister Crowley, diary entry, August 8, 1923. It does everything but give you a blowjob, Rosenberg had said of the new building for his London headquarters at an opening dinner for the office staff stationed there. It was an inside joke, a repetition of something he had once gotten in trouble for saying about the Niptron terminal when it first came out. But reports from employees who were already working there indicated that Rosenberg Plaza might very well be capable of giving you a blowjob. At least, that's what it said in the Wired magazine article. One was reading on my laptop, connected to my mobile phone for data. I was reading it as we inched along in London's morning rush hour in the Vauxhall. The article cited certain anonymous posts by alleged Rosenberg employees on 4chan, which I also began reading. Rosenberg Plaza was built to be the smartest building in Europe, construction having started back when England was considered part of Europe. It was now the building that covered the largest landmass of any in the City of London. It supposedly was able to generate all of its own energy due to being covered entirely in, quote, solar windows. In fact, it was actually generating more energy than it used, creating a surplus that was sold to the employees' profit. There were other schemes for generating energy within the building also. Energy was harnessed from the exercise equipment in the gym, with workers given fixed times that they were expected to spend there. This was enforced with alarms programmed for them onto their employer-issued smartphones. Reportedly, there was a secret power generator located in a sub-basement of the main building that converted organic compost from employee lunches into energy. But only certain high-level executives had ever seen it, and they weren't allowed to talk about it. Because of the covert way in which the program was being run, nobody could officially confirm this, and therefore nobody knew how well the energy conversion was working, but presumably it was worth doing. The recycling of organic material had continued unabated from the time the building had opened for workers, almost a year earlier, until then, the day on which the public parts of the plaza were going to be opened, including the Mithraeum. Since there were actually two buildings in Rosenberg's new plaza, including a smaller one built to lease to other tenants, connected by a sky bridge, I wondered if the other tenants were required to participate in Rosenberg's organic recycling scheme, and if all of its bathrooms were hooked up to the same system. I wonder if the other tenants of the plaza are required to participate in Rosenberg's organic recycling scheme, I thought to myself. From my reading, I further learned that the Rosenberg office building was super energy efficient because it was equipped with a digital ceiling. This means that the building itself responded to people's needs by spying on them constantly to figure out exactly when and where they required light, heat, or air conditioning. For this, cameras and microphones were everywhere, along with other sensors of every imaginable type, feeding data into a network of AIs that ran the entire plaza as one integrated system. All artificial light was provided by a field of hexagonal white flowers containing high-efficiency LEDs that covered the ceilings. But this was largely supplemented by the gigantic sunroof on top that supplied natural light. There were also several much smaller sunroof portals that channeled sunlight into specific areas of the building. The building also contained quite a lot of amenities to provide comfort and ease for those who worked there. Robotic vending machines on wheels could be ordered at the push of a button, so people could work at a desk for long hours without having to leave to get food. In fact, the digital ceiling allowed them to program hand signals or other body movements that could be used as passwords to summon food, or the police, or an ambulance, or simply to tell one's subordinate to come immediately. This was possible, of course, because it was sensing and tracking everybody's movements at all times. All of these features could also be utilized with a smartphone. Indeed, everybody had to use their phone every day just to find an available desk, workstation, or meeting room, which is why there were phone charging stations everywhere. It was better than the clapper, better than a life alert button, a complete George Jetson office. A Starship Enterprise docked in the City of London. But it got weirder. Of course it did. Rosenberg had been an early investor in sex robot industry also. Thus, my presumption that the building itself could provide sexual favors was not unfounded. In fact, I next discovered a 4chan thread, barely a week old, in which several alleged Rosenberg employees discussed the hidden secrets of the building known only to the elites among the organization. They said that there was a special bathroom, available only to certain employees, all of them men, which was equipped with a robotic glory hole. Quite literally, there was a hole in the wall, covered with a small round door, in which a man could insert his penis and receive, at the push of a button, an artificially induced orgasm. Afterwards, he would press another button, which caused the door to close again, and the hole would rinse itself with a sterilizing solution, making itself ready for the next user. There was a barbarous code word for this special room, qapqa. None of the people talking about the glory hole would admit to having used it. I suspected some were lying about that. However, there didn't seem to be the same kind of shame about using the company's sex robots at office parties, which several of them had apparently been treated to. I thought it was odd that this didn't embarrass them, because it basically amounted to the same thing in my mind. I also found myself wondering if the semen was being recycled like the other organic material in the building. Heck, maybe even the toilets are hooked up to the generator, I thought, recalling that both urine and feces were thought of by alchemists as substances of great power. I remembered that Hennig Brand had discovered phosphorus in 1669 while performing alchemical experiments with urine. More recently, I recalled, a team of Nigerian girls had built a urine-powered generator just a few years back, so it seemed possible, though improbable. Then I read another detail about the women's bathrooms in Rosenberg Plaza, those for general female employee use that seemed to fit in with such a scenario. The toilets were equipped with separate flush buttons for liquid and solid waste. Nothing too weird about that, I thought at first. They do that at the airports in Portland. Wastes less water that way. The liquid flush uses less than the solid flush. But then I read the next few lines of a 4chan post. To be clear, we are specifically asked to ensure that there is no solid waste in our urine flushes. After each flush, the bowl uses sound waves to cleanse itself. I've never tested it, because people who make mistakes around here get fired the first time. But I'll bet that if you mixed your poop and pee, the building would know, and you would get caught right away. Then there was another comment from the same person, adding another amazing detail. There aren't many women working here, and most of those are past menopause. But I've heard that this handful of younger women get the day off whenever it's the first day of their period. There's a special room in the first basement where these women lay all day on a modified dissection table, nicknamed the periodic table, equipped with conduits and a reservoir for collecting the blood. She gets paid for doing this instead of working all day, and is forbidden from discussing it with other employees, although somebody obviously discussed it with me. She would not be able to hide the fact that she's menstruating even if she wanted to. The building knows you're going to menstruate 2 days before you start, and sends an alert to your smartphone confirming your appointment in the subterranean menstrual hut. Is Rosenberg secretly harnessing some age-old alchemical technology in his smart building? I wondered. I think you should have a look at these aerials of the plaza, Paris said, handing me a stack of documents. On top was a color printout showing a bird's-eye photo of the whole site. Tell me if you see any symbolism there, he said. I looked. The main building was an odd shape, kind of like a keystone, but not really. The other, smaller building resembled a coffin shape. The sides of the building and the rims of the roofs were a shimmering gold color, while the rest of the rooftops were filled in with powder blue. In the middle of the roof of the main building was a large, white, circular bubble, which I thought to be the sunroof. I squinted my eyes and tried turning it around several times. I noticed that the shape formed by the 5 streets surrounding the site, Cannon Street, Queen Victoria Street, Bucklersbury, and Walbrook, resembled the diamond shape used in the Superman logo. But what could that possibly mean? I wondered. Then I noticed how the triangular pieces of sidewalk on the ends of the diamond completed it, like the horns on a bull, to form a very particular triangle shape. It was the same triangle shape I had seen in my mind's eye when I was at Stratford House looking at the map made from the bull intestines. Cannon Street and Victoria Street seemed to encompass the contents of the triangle like the blades on a pair of scissors. I decided to thumb through the rest of the papers. Next in the stack was a blueprint for a trefoil spiral ramp that apparently wrapped all the way around the larger building in lieu of a staircase. It wasn't exactly a triskelion, the Celtic symbol made from 3 spirals, although it resembled one. Instead, it was all made from one line, wound in a way that almost seemed like a Mobius strip staircase from an M.C. Escher drawing. I saw that the building had been constructed in a certain way, that most of the above-ground floors were entirely open in the middle, and almost every such floor was visible from every other floor when standing near the center. The ramp connected them all, so that if you rode a skateboard from the top to the bottom, you would visit all of the sides of the building, which was made from 6 huge walls surrounding 7 pillars. The main lobby on the ground floor, however, had a full ceiling, but it was dominated by an object in the center called Vortex. I could not tell what it was from looking at the pictures, so I searched the 4chan board for employee posts about it. I found one, written by a janitor who worked there. Apparently, it was some kind of glass-enclosed decorative feature containing what appeared to be water and other fluids of various earth tone colors, swirling around inside. It was made in the shape of a curved triangle. The management of the company was very secretive about the vortex, what it contained, and what it emptied into. Nobody knew if it had a purpose beyond mere decoration. They only let certain people perform maintenance on it, and none of the lower-level employees had ever talked to those people. The janitor theorized that the toilets and the glory holes were hooked up to pipes that somehow emptied into the vortex. He thought it was actually a fountain of untreated sewer water purporting to be a decoration. He also said there were pipes leading to the vortex from the coffin house, their actual nickname for the coffin-shaped auxiliary building that was ostensibly empty at present. Then from there, he said, pipes led to the generator in the basement. As I read on about Rosenberg Plaza, particularly the large building that housed the company's own headquarters, I learned that instead of having individual offices or even cubicles for the employees, the space was constructed of hexagonal pods put together like Legos. There was usually one side left open as an entrance, which could be easily rearranged at will. Individual offices were discouraged, and there were only a few for certain executives. So people shared hexagons, and shared, or perhaps competed for, the specially designed L-shaped desks lining the sides of the hexagons. None of them had doors, so they were easy to move from room to room. The ratio of workers to desks was 2.5 to 1. It was something called hot desking. This was apparently all the rage in the European business world. There, a philosophy called het nieuwe werken, the new work, was being foisted upon every poor sucker who needed to earn an income. This approach, the literature quoted Rosenberg as saying, encourages people to work together. It forced them to move around constantly rather than being stuck at a single desk. People kept their personal items in storage lockers. Even these they were encouraged to change constantly. It was against the rules to use the same locker 3 days in a row. A labyrinth of hexagons, I thought, just like a beehive. Then I remembered the design of the library in Jorge Luis Borges' surrealist novel, The Library of Babel, which was almost identical. There, the hexagonal cubicles contained books made from all possible combinations of a 25-letter character set, most of them gibberish. The similarity was so close it couldn't be accidental. To me, someone who suffers from acute social anxiety, values privacy, and would stay home from school as a child to avoid group projects, the thought of working in a place like this seemed like an absolute nightmare. But, after a minute of thought, it occurred to me that this whole design, the hexagonal pods and the spiral ramp, was probably meant to facilitate the movement of robots. It wasn't just about the robots that were already serving food to employees there, or cleaning up their food crumbs, or sucking their dicks at office parties. In the near future, surely robots will soon replace the vast majority of those employees, I thought. And robots don't need privacy. In fact, the machines that would soon be running the place would be better able to spy on the few humans that were left if there weren't any walls or ceilings in the way. A little more reading confirmed that the place was patrolled by robocops at night. These tin cans on wheels were not armed, but alerted the security team to anything unusual. Also, as per the concept of smart cleaning, the sensors around the building collected data on all activity within. This was so that the cleaning robots would know exactly when, where, and how something needed to be cleaned without having to be told. If you put your gum underneath the desk you were borrowing, a robot would immediately come clean it up, and probably also tattle on you to your boss. I thought again about my theory that Rosenberg Plaza housed an alchemical laboratory converting the urine, feces, semen, and menstrual blood of his workers into energy and/or other products. It occurred to me that such a system could easily be masked within the labyrinth of long tubes that were shown on the plans running throughout all of the walls, ceilings, and ramps for radiant climate control. These were all connected to a large cluster of objects in the first sub-basement labeled water storage tanks in the blueprints. But they were of different shapes and sizes, all networked together with pipes, and clearly not all just for storing water. Their function is being masked, I thought silently. This is the secret generator. Then I noticed that the largest of the tanks was positioned directly beneath the vortex. Pipes were also shown connecting the vortex directly to the other tanks in the basement. It was a confusing circle of connections. I couldn't tell what was flowing into what. I kept these observations to myself. Chesterfield asked to look at the papers, so I handed them over, pointing out the unique properties of the spiral ramp. This sparked something in him. His eyes lit up. The Triskelion was a womb symbol to the Celts, he said, looking at me proudly. Often there was a sun symbol in the middle, which could be taken to represent the rebirth of the sun god. It could be related. On Rosenberg's roof, he's got a white circular sunroof to represent that part of the symbol. And the site as a whole looks like the Superman logo, Paris said, which, if you think about it, resembles a female pelvis. I was shocked by both of their contributions. Most amazing was that Paris had also noted the resemblance to the Superman symbol. The resemblance to female anatomy had occurred to me too, but I had dismissed it, since I didn't take the Superman connection seriously in the first place. Now I thought about the fact that Superman wore what appeared to be a pair of red bikini briefs on the outside of his blue leggings, as if to draw attention to the pelvic shape. A tingle went down the back of my neck. I knew we were on to something. Okay, I said. I've never heard that before, but if you thought of it, that means somebody else probably did too. I contemplated the origin of the word Superman, involving the Overman theories of Nietzsche, and how Hitler adopted them, thinking there was a new master race on the horizon. According to Hermann Rauschning, Hitler once said of this, "I have seen the new man. He is intrepid and cruel. I was afraid of him." Then there was the first use of the term Superman in English. This came from Aleister Crowley's novel Moonchild, the one where he wrote about creating a child with divine parentage through sex magic. Regarding this process, he had said, "The idea has been almost universal in one form or another. The wish has always been for a Messiah or Superman, and the method some attempt to produce man by artificial or at least abnormal means." My meditation on these subjects was broken when I realized that we were going by St. Paul's Cathedral again. Then before I knew it, the car stopped at a stoplight between two office buildings. Paris turned around to speak to me. "Okay, you guys can get out." "Where are we?" I asked. "Rosenberg Plaza," he said. "The ribbon cutting will happen on the Walbrook side, east, right in front of the entrance to the Mithraeum. Then go on to the conference room. That's where Rosenberg will give a speech." "Should we bring the cat?" I said. The question was directed at Chesterfield, who was already getting out of the car. "No, don't worry. I'll take care of her. I have a special place where I can put her until it's safe. Try to figure out what's going on at this building. I'll let you know how my meeting goes." I said goodbye and got out. Before I closed the door, Chesterfield leaned over the back seat, where his cat had been sitting next to me, and stuck his fingers through the bars of the cage. He told her he would miss her, and then thanked Paris for taking care of his little girl. Then the other agent drove off, leaving us standing next to the bulky, impenetrable mass that housed the Temple of Mithras. I looked down the street to get a scope of the entirety of the site. We were on the western corner of the Superman logo, formed by the site, with the buildings on our right. I looked down the street northwest and saw the division between the two structures, with the footpath leading down between them to the arcade, as it was called in the paperwork I'd seen. There we would surely find the promised dining and retail establishments that the plan said would be there. Having only had a scone since the regurgitated meal at the pub the previous night, I was hungry. "Let's find a restaurant," I said. "We have 40 minutes to kill until the ribbon cutting." "Okay, sure," Chesterfield agreed. "What's the coffin-shaped building for?" I wondered aloud as we walked past it. I didn't see much about it in the design plans. "I saw it in the permit applications," said Chesterfield. "They were at the back of the stack. Supposedly they're going to sublease it, but I'll bet it's still completely empty. It's just for real estate speculation. That's what most of the office buildings in the city are used for, honestly. Hardly any of them are more than half full. It's a shame." "Did you notice anything else in the permit apps?" I asked. "Yes, actually," he replied. "There used to be a tunnel from the basement of Bucklersbury House, which is the building that used to be here. That tunnel connected to the basement of Mansion House. where the Lord Mayor lives. Rosenberg petitioned to keep this structure and incorporate it into his new building. Rosenberg is quite friendly with the Lord Mayor, so I do wonder what they may be getting up to together. We turned down the walkway between the buildings, which, according to the street sign, was actually the historic Watling Street, now restored to its former trajectory, but with a stone tile floor and a glass ceiling. Within a few feet, we immediately noticed a sign for Oz Pizza and Ping Pong Parlor, with Lewis Carroll characters painted in the windows. A handwritten sign taped to the inside of the door advertised their ping pong tournament for that afternoon, coinciding with the Mithraeum opening. I realized that this was the place Drexella, the police lady, had mentioned. I found something about it inherently revolting, but Chesterfield wanted to go in, and I was starving. So I went along. The restaurant contained 6 dining tables and 2 ping-pong tables, beyond which was a set of doors that seemed to lead out into the lobby of the Rosenberg office building. So far, nobody had arrived yet for the tournament. The place was empty, except for us, and the greasy-skinned, white teenage boy covered with tattoos and piercings who worked behind the counter. He looked like he was either on drugs or suffering from some neurologic problem. He stared at us with an open mouth. In addition to the pictures of Alice and the Cheshire Cat painted on the windows, there were murals with similar themes on the walls inside. Lamps were mounted on the walls, all held in place with plastic human arms. Behind the counter, there was a framed painting of a trinacria, which is a gorgon head with 3 legs for a body, and not much else. A trinacria is a heraldic emblem, part of the flag of Sicily. It's associated with a legend that I was familiar with. The story is that the legs represent the 3 pillars which, according to myth, hold up the island. The head in the middle signified a little boy named Colapes. It was said that he voluntarily swam under the island and replaced one of the pillars, which was broken, with himself, thereafter serving to help bear that burden eternally. The owners of Oz Pizza must be Sicilian, I thought. Other wall art, however, was not as easily explained. In the center of the main wall was a poster advertising their signature pizza, SP, which was called The Beast. What struck me even more than the awful typo in a professionally produced full-color poster was the odd way in which the pizza was sliced and the toppings arranged. The pie, which at 10.8 inches was no bigger than their regular large size, 11 inches, featured only 4 pieces of pepperoni, accompanied by just one other topping, a single black olive. The pepperoni pieces were all overlapping in the center. On the bottom were 2 pieces, intersecting so as to form a vesica Pisces shape. Then on top of this, in the center and slightly below, were 2 more pieces, both intersecting with each other and with the other 2. Together, if you trace the outline of the shape formed by the stack of pepperoni, you would see a classic trefoil clover shape. The pizza itself had been cut so as to form a 7-pointed unicursal star. This meant that there was an outer ring with 14 slices, 7 thin ones and 7 fat ones. These surrounded 5 tiny triangles and a heptagon in the center. However, the pepperoni slices were stacked on top of these, so that you could only see 2 of the tiny triangles and only 3 sides of the heptagon. This meant that the pizza had been cut and cooked before the pepperoni was put on. Over the top of the upper portion of the pizza, the price, £9.99, was written in a black font with a red border, but each digit was slightly misaligned with the others. It makes no practical sense to design it this way, I thought, and why call it the Beast when it's not especially large and doesn't have an extraordinary amount of toppings? In fact, hardly any. I stared at the poster. So did Chesterfield. Then we stared at each other. I shrugged my shoulders and mouthed the words, "I have no idea." Chesterfield, apparently more hungry than curious, turned back around to the counter and ordered, "A simple slice of cheese pizza, please," he said. The boy at the counter continued to stare at his face for 20 seconds before he registered a belated response. "Oh, sure," he said. "Anything for you?" he asked me. "No thanks," I replied. "But you said you were hungry," argued Chesterfield. "Come on, I'll buy again." "No thanks," I said. I lost my appetite. I was feeling uneasy there for some reason, but I didn't know why. The boy put a slice of cheese pizza in the oven for Chesterfield. "How long has this place been open?" I asked. "Oh, about 4 months," the boy responded. "My mom got me a job here. She knows the guy who owns the building." "You mean Rosenberg?" I said. "She knows him?" "Yeah, I guess," he replied. Clearly, he either didn't know the details of who the man was and how his mother knew him, or else he just wasn't going to tell us. He picked at his fingernails for a minute and then pulled the pizza out of the oven. "Do you want the drizzly?" he asked Chesterfield, holding it out on a paper plate. "The what?" the agent replied, bewildered. "Oh, the drizzly is our special hot sauce," he said. "You want to try it?" He held up a clear squeeze bottle filled with a red liquid. "Okay, sure," said Chesterfield. The boy put the plate with the hot pizza slice down on the counter, then proceeded to pour the drizzly onto the pizza. Something about the odor of the sauce and the spooging sound it made as he squeezed it out caused me to experience a sharp wave of nausea. This brought clarity, as he applied the drizzly with more care than a real moron could muster, forming a perfect counterclockwise triangular spiral. I flashed on where I had seen that symbol before. It was from the FBI's website, on their official list of symbols used by the pedophile community. The spiral triangle was the international sign of boy lovers. It had been infamously found on the logo of a politically connected pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. that some believed was part of a child trafficking ring. This caused a scandal that led to the company changing their logo in December of 2016. Then, while thinking about Aleister Crowley and his voracious defense of pederasty in his own writings, I instinctively clasped my hand to my mouth in horror as the next realization hit me. Looking again at the poster for the Beast Pizza, it now occurred to me what it represented. I used my phone to do a Google image search, just to confirm what I already knew. Sure enough, the pizza on the poster was decorated to look exactly like the signet of the beast, designed by Aleister Crowley. It was a symbol printed, among other places, as an illustration to go with a text by Crowley called Liber Oz, which proclaimed the right of his followers to love whoever and however their will desired. It also stated their right to kill anybody who got in their way. The signet consisted of a heptagram inside of a circle, with 4 circles in the middle, represented on the poster by the pepperoni. The source I read couldn't explain what the circles in the middle truly meant, except to say that their resemblance to a penis and testicles was intentional. At the bottom of the signet, Crowley had put the number 666, a number he identified with personally, as he fancied himself the Antichrist. On the poster, the signet had been cleverly turned upside down, so that the 3 sixes became the 3 nines of the pizza's price. I turned back to Chesterfield to explain this to him, but then I saw him chomping down happily on the disgusting slice of filth. I instinctively grabbed it out of his mouth. "Don't eat it!" I shouted. He and the teenage boy looked at me with confusion. I grabbed Chesterfield by the necktie and led him out the door, tossing the pizza slice in the garbage can near the exit. He wisely said nothing until we got outside, but he put a 5-pound note in the boy's tip jar, presumably to make up for my rudeness. "What's wrong?" he said. "I was hungry, and I paid for that." "There are Crowley sigils and pedophile symbols all over that place," I said. "God knows what they put in the drizzly. Who knows what they even put in the cheese?" "What exactly do you mean?" he asked. I showed him how the pizza on the poster corresponded to the signet of the beast. Then I explained how much Crowley valued the ingestion of sperm, menstrual blood, urine, and feces as spiritually beneficial. I told him how Crowley's cult members would put these substances in their Eucharist cakes, called Cakes of Light, for their Gnostic Mass rituals, which were open to the public. Guests attending these rituals were not warned of the cake's contents. As I elucidated, Chesterfield began to turn green. He walked to a nearby water fountain and rinsed his mouth out. Then he stuck his fingers in and appeared to contemplate gagging himself to purge his stomach. But he decided not to. "Now think," I said to Chesterfield. "You know we're following the trail of some weird occultists who conjure demons, fuck kids, murder people, and chop them up. Didn't you even think for a minute that there might be cum in the pizza before you started putting it in your mouth?" "No, that didn't occur to me," he answered, embarrassed and annoyed. "So I guess wine and cheese at the lecture is off the menu too, right? Speaking of which, let's get going. I want to get a nice spot up front, so I can get a good look at this boy fucker who sells cum pizza and worships Mithras." He began to walk southeast down the arcade towards Walbrook. "He's probably just subleasing to the cum pizza people," I said. As I walked away, I noticed a small sign in the window that I hadn't seen before. It said, so strangely, "Pizza by the hour. Inquire within." I took a photo of it with my phone. Then I saw the kid that worked there walking towards the glass door, staring angrily at me. I hustled to catch up with Chesterfield. We got to the end of the arcade and turned left. There we saw a crowd of maybe 60 people, all huddled around one of the doors of the building. The street had been blocked off both ways by police tape, and there were a couple of cops on each end standing guard lazily. We worked our way to the front. We saw that there were posters on the walls identifying this as the location of the temple. These included photos of some of the artifacts inside and of the archaeology that had taken place over the previous few years. The historian inside of me began to get excited. Within a few moments, there was a bit of clamor and commotion. Rosenberg and his entourage, including several bodyguards, were arriving from the north side of the street. The lead man himself wore a tailored black pinstripe suite with brown stripes and a red rose on the lapel. An assistant held the unavoidable giant scissors, which, after some cheers and a forgettable introduction in Rosenberg's nasally voice, were used by him to cut the ribbon, bringing even more applause. Then the doors opened. Rosenberg promised to give a speech to those interested in conference room in 30 minutes. Then he and his bodyguards disappeared around the corner. Well, if the Antichrist is a Poindexter, then that may well be the Antichrist, said Chesterfield, acknowledging the inherent dorkiness of the rich and powerful man that we'd just seen. After waiting for the people in front of us to go inside the temple, we got our turn. I let Chesterfield pay the suggested donation of £9 for both of us. The first room we entered was a gallery full of artifacts and framed photos. Off to the right, there was a staircase leading down into the temple itself. Not wanting to compete with the crowds to get down there, I suggested we look at the artifacts first. That is where our fears about the Mithraeum were confirmed. The first thing we saw that we recognized was the bust of Serapis with the modius on his head. It had been discovered along with the other artifacts when the Mithraeum was first found beneath Bucklersbury House in 1954. It had also been featured in the film Easter Sunday, April Fool, when the boy had been castrated among the ruins. A few feet away from that, we found, in a glass case, the little metal casket on a chain containing the round strainer, which had also been used in the film. The plaque next to the case described it as a device for straining and administering psychoactive herbs during rituals. Depicted on the side of the casket was a person, who looked like a child to me, emerging from a rectangular box on the ground while an upright standing grown man gripped his arm to help him up. I thought it might be Mithras emerging from the stone, but the plaque said that it probably illustrated a death and rebirth ritual practiced by the cult. In this rite, the initiate would be drugged into a comatose state, buried, and then let out of the tomb upon awakening. I knew it very well could have been a little boy, because I had read that Mithra's temples accepted applicants as young as 7. Then, as if we didn't already know what we were dealing with, we saw the final confirmation. The posters of the original dig underneath Bucklersbury House were unmistakable. These were the stones that the boy in the film had been lying on when he was castrated. The site had been opened in 1954, and then the stones of the Mithraeum were moved elsewhere just a few weeks later so that they could finish building Bucklersbury House. The first very poor restoration of the ruins didn't go on display in Temple Court until 1956. So the castration rite had happened sometime between those two events. Chapter 19. Rose Mountain. I am the son of a man and a woman from what I have been told. This astonishes me. I believed I was something more. Comte de Lautremont, Maldoror. Thus we were already feeling very heavy in our hearts, reeling from the implications of what we'd found, when we made our way down the stairs into the Mithraeum itself, which was 1 floor underground. Inside, there was nothing visually surprising. It was my first time being inside such a temple, but it had been restored well, so that it looked exactly how I'd imagined a Mithraeum should. They all generally followed the same plan, and this did too. 1 long aisle leading to an apse with an altar in front of it. The Tartoctony, depicting Mithras slaying the bull, was mounted on the wall behind the altar. All along the aisle were stone couches where members would have slouched back and watched the proceedings, or whatever else they did together. It seemed like they all did to me, empty and austere. They were made to look like large, open caves, and this they achieved. What struck me was not the decor or design, which was as expected. Instead, it was the thickness of the atmosphere. Even stuffed with a crowd, The temple felt like it was full of choking energy, fear, anger, and pain. The pungent smell of a putrid flavor of incense came to my nose, even though I knew it was only coming from my mind. I asked Chesterfield if he sensed it too, but he said that he wasn't sure. He suggested that maybe it was just because being underground again was bringing back memories of my kidnapping by Leopold. We began to follow several of the others back through the gallery, then through the door in the back that led to a large circular hallway. The walls were lined with blonde wood paneling and they curved up in a concave manner. We made our way up the ramp towards the ground floor. It was really more like a tunnel spiraling up to the next floor and no doubt part of the spiral ramp that ran through the rest of the building. It also led back down the other way to another sub-basement below, but that way was cordoned off. As we emerged from the underground level and into the light, I looked up at the ceiling and saw that much of it was sunlight, coming through a large piece of glass in the ceiling on top of which was a fountain of dirty water. Hidden jets on the sides were constantly injecting a denser, brown substance that swirled around in the mix. I could see why people thought that the vortex contained sewer water. I also noted that, instead of merely being a rounded triangle, as the janitor on 4chan had described it, the shape more closely resembled the Superman logo with rounded corners. I took note of the coincidence. I also noticed that once we got to the second floor, so that we were above the vortex, the carpet on the ramp was lined on both sides with a transparent tube running constantly with a yellow-orange fluid. These are the tubes carrying urine to the vortex, I thought. Cordons and posted signs encouraged us to keep moving up the ramp, while discouraging us from visiting the lobby or any of the other intervening floors, promising that the conference room was ahead. So we kept going until we were almost at the top of the building, on what must have been the 9th floor, as there were only 10 and just one up above us. There we found the conference room, surrounded by blonde wooden columns interspersed with clear glass. The podium, projector screen, and red plastic chairs could be seen from the ramp. Along the side of the wall on the left were 2 tables serving wine and cheese, which Chesterfield and I knew to avoid. As we all filed in, I saw that the initial crowd of 60 had thinned to about 25. I spotted a familiar figure sitting in the front row. It was Drexella, the lady cop. As soon as I recognized her, she turned around, smiled, and waved, like she had felt my eyes on her. We had no choice but to sit down next to her. "Hey, Drexella," I said. "Nice to see you again." "Yep," she said, smacking gum as she spoke. "Wouldn't miss it. Rosenberg's a family friend. I've been waiting for this for years." "Really?" said Chesterfield. "We just met someone downstairs whose mother is also a family friend of his." "Oh, you mean Dennis at Oz Pizza?" "Yep, that's my boy," she said proudly. I cringed. "We'll be on the same ping-pong team later on at the tournament." "So how exactly do you know Mr. Rosenberg?" Chesterfield asked. But just then, the lights were dimmed over the audience, and the spotlight over the podium was put on. Within a few seconds, Rosenberg entered from the back, this time wearing a red Phrygian cap, and everybody clapped. He took the stage and began to speak. "Just call me Papa Smurf," was his first line, and everybody howled with laughter. He then began a speech about the history of the city of London, and to symbolic connections between the beliefs of the Mithraic cult, which I will attempt to paraphrase below. He said, "It is fitting that the temple which we presented to you, fully restored for the first time today, was once the site of homage to gods of not one but 3 different aspects of finance. First, of course, it was a temple to Mithras, the god of contracts. The Mithraic cult was called the Syndicoi, the people of the handshake, from which we get our word, syndicate. This is based on the deal that was struck, according to Mithraic mythology, between Sol and Mithras. After Sol and all of his henchmen, the other planetary archons, had been defeated by Mithras in his march to the highest sphere in heaven, they made an agreement with each other to share both the power and the glory of the sun, which they sealed with a handshake before sitting down to break bread together. Some historians believe that the very origin of the custom of shaking hands, performed millions of times a day now, most often in a business setting, had its origins with the Mithras cult. This agreement between Sol and Mithras, which Mithraists believed kept the sun rising and setting each day, was based upon mutual trust in the sacred nature of the oath. This is why they would invoke the name of Mithras as the enforcer of oaths whenever a new contract was signed. This same ethic as we all know, is what lies behind everything that happens in business and finance today, ever since the Knights Templar invented the concept of the checking system. I noticed right away several things about this speech. For one thing, Rosenberg's analysis of Mithraism was very similar to my own, and not entirely consistent with what is right now commonly agreed upon by historians. What I mean is that for some reason, they cannot see that the images of Sol and Mithras together clearly show him defeating the sun god and forcing him to bow down in supplication. This is shown happening before the handshake and before the shared meal was permitted to occur, which so many have claimed is the origin of the Christian Eucharist. Rosenberg chose not to mention the specific imagery of the sun bowing down to Mithras, but he did relate the meaning of it. Another thing I noted was that he chose to use the term planetary archons. I couldn't think of any author on the subject of Mithras who has referred to the planetary powers he ruled over as archons. This term brings up specifically Gnostic connotations and implies a negative view of their role in the cosmos as tyrannical. According to Gnostic thought, we are living in an invisible jail cell, made of illusion, and the planetary archons are our captors, the rulers of our sad fate in this lonely world of despair. To interpret this view as being present in Mithraism, as no previous author on the subject had done, would mean that Mithras was a heroic figure precisely because he fought and subdued these powers. It also indicates that he himself became the chief archon then, and thereafter allowed the others to rule underneath him as subordinates. He would then have essentially become the new demiurge, the new chief jail warden. This viewpoint, I believe, was further reflected in the rest of Rosenberg's speech. He said, "Now this temple wasn't always exclusively a temple to Mithras. They found statues of other gods in there as well. One was Serapis, aka Hades, Pluto, or Dispater, the god of the underworld, and the god of the mineral wealth beneath the earth. This is where we get the word plutocrat for those who rule with the power of gold and silver. They also found here a statue of Mercury, the wily patron of both commerce and thievery. From his first day of birth, he was making business deals with Apollo, yet another figure to hold the title of sun god. There's so many of them." He trailed off for a minute and coughed, staring off into the corner. He appeared to succumb to a short personal mental trip before shaking it off. Then he continued, "But we know that Mercury's quicksilver-tongued promises are not to be trusted. We also know that gold and silver lose their shine if we lose our trust in one another. If the Mithraic value of the sacred oath is not honored, all money systems fail. All societies fail when that happens. This is why the real basis of the wealth of a society today is this mutual trust." The ranks of the Mithraic cult throughout the Roman Empire were initially filled with soldiers. Most of them were foreign legionnaires, rather than native Romans. And these, as any student of history knows, were not free men, but slaves. In the Roman Empire, virtually every person with any sort of functional job was officially a slave to some landholder. The landholders did not work. They owned people who would do everything for them. Even the office holders in the municipal governments were not free men, with the occasional exception of someone who was able somehow to purchase or earn their freedom. This is why these government office holders were called, in Latin, servi publici, public servants. When I served as the mayor of New York some years ago, I often thought about this fact. I can tell you that being a billionaire businessman makes you feel 1,000 times more powerful than being a mere elected official. And most of the public servants I've met in my time would have to admit that they are slaves to the businessmen who are truly pulling the strings behind the scenes. Because Roman soldiers were slaves, it was only fitting that their god, Mithras, wore the Phrygian cap, like I'm wearing now. It was the symbol of a freed slave. Mithras identified himself with Saturn, the highest of the planetary archons, and Saturn also wore the Phrygian cap. During Saturnalia, the Roman winter solstice festival, slaves were given temporary freedom, and the whole social order was upended. Slaves would wear these hats, now called liberty caps, as a symbol of their freedom. This was because Saturn, the alleged founder of the Italian civilization, was remembered for having ruled over a golden age of abundance in the ancient past, during which no one was compelled to work for another. Within the temples of Mithras, the social order was always upended in the same manner. Even in the later years, when the emperor himself had joined and the latifundia were flocking to Mithraeums, we find in the records the names of slaves shown to be worshipping alongside their free superiors, often with the slaves occupying the positions of leadership. As Mithraic scholar Franz Cumont put it, In these societies, the last frequently became the first, and the first the last. Today it seems we live in a society where wealth and power has been largely divorced from the privilege of birth. The distinction between slave and freeman has been broken down. Private enterprise and even public service are routes to wealth and power that potentially anyone can follow. I came from a family of Jewish immigrants to New York, and I now possess 32 times more wealth than Her Majesty the Queen of England. At this point, Chesterfield, becoming visibly annoyed, nudged me with his elbow, then whispered in my ear. He can't stop pointing that out. He's obsessed with it. I tried to ignore him and strained to hear Rosenberg as he continued. I dare say that I believe a large part of this change has been spearheaded from right here, the square mile of the sovereign city of London, which still occupies the pomerium of the old Roman city of Londinium. The pomerium of a Roman city, by the way, which was the area within the walls, was officially designated by a state augur using divination, and did not necessarily encompass all of the territory controlled politically by the city. It was a sacred boundary, serving obscure purposes that historians still don't totally understand. Yet, for some reason, perhaps mystical, even though most of London's wall is gone, the sacred boundary remains. As all of you locals know, the City of London, governed by City of London Corporation, has always been a political power on equal par with the Crown, keeping it in check. The rights of the city are actually protected eternally in a special clause provided in the Magna Carta, to which the Lord Mayor was a signatory. This corporation is formed by the freemen of the city and the livery companies. It was a government made of merchants and artisans who owned the freeholds to the buildings out of which they operated, or belonged to guilds that did, and were therefore called free. The city is separate from the kingdom in some ways, and yet it plays a leading part in many others, with the Lord Mayor even playing a role in the coronation of the monarch. As you know, monarchs used to traditionally ask permission to enter the city, with an elaborate ceremony at Temple Bar necessary to grant it. Although this ceremony has since been dispensed with, and the Crown is now quite cooperative with the city, I think this is only because the Corporation of London has so many times in the past not hesitated to remind the monarchs that they must either share power with the city and respect its rights, or be replaced. One of the aldermen from the early 20th century, Lord Wakefield of Hythe, wrote in his book London Forever about how the city had always been the real kingmaker in the kingdom. He credits the corporation with effecting every change of dynasty that has occurred in England, including allowing the formation of the Protectorate and dispensing with it later when it had outlived its usefulness. He stated, London stood for liberty and moderation, and was the champion of constitutional rights regardless of the nature of the oppressor. When the king ceased to respect the laws of the land and the interests of his people, the sovereign city drove him from the throne. When the Commonwealth ceased to represent popular government and tried to rule by force of arms, the secession of the city brought back the exiled Stuarts. By its action, the sovereign city expressed the national dislike for republican government and England's firm belief in constitutional monarchy as the best form of government for a free people. So just as Mithras and Sol agreed to share ultimate power for the greater good, and to keep each other in check with mutual trust based on mutual understanding, the Crown and the city do also. It is fitting, then, that today we have been able to open the Temple of Mithras once again, but now in a magical square mile that has led the world in a social revolution based on the merit of earned credit rather than the accident of birth. How amazing is it that all this time, until its discovery in 1954, the Temple of Mithras was right here, right next to the official home of the Lord Mayor, whose office has always led this fight. It's next to the Bank of England, which financed the Royal Navy and allowed Britain to build her magnificent empire. And you know that the National Bank provided the prototype upon which the world's central banks now function, stabilizing currencies and growing economies throughout the centuries since. And of course, the London Bullion Market Association, where the prices of precious metals are fixed for the world each day, is right here as well. 181. This location we stand upon right now is important for several other reasons. The London Stone once stood at 111 Cannon Street, just one block east of here. There is a tradition, lost in the fog of ancestral memory, that says the Lord Mayor used to be sworn into office upon this stone. Another tradition, confused with Arthurian legend, seems to imply that if a certain sword, once embedded in the stone to the hilt, could be removed from it, the holder would then become the King of England. The truth veiled behind these myths was that the city of London, represented by the stone, restrained the sword of state from being abused by the monarch against the freemen. Whenever that gentle but firm restraint failed, and the monarch insisted upon brandishing a weapon that ought best to remain holstered, the city saw to it that new blood would take the throne instead. That was the malarium of the Roman city, the foundation of all the geographical measurements within. It may also have been their terminus stone, sacred to Jupiter, marking the crossroads where their two main thoroughfares intersected. Not coincidentally, I believe this exact point has for the last several centuries been the navel of the finance world and the crossroads of the global marketplace. I believe this is more true now than ever before, and we are just getting started. We all know that the modern money system, while an improvement upon the past, is still another form of slavery. But I believe that there is another phase coming in our evolution as a species, which will set us free from this once and for all. It involves artificial intelligence, intelligently planned buildings, and intelligently run communities. It involves utilizing the untapped power and potencies that lie hidden within our own human bodies. And it starts right here at Rosenberg Plaza. With that anticlimactic summation, with that ridiculous pretension to be the harbinger of the future emancipation of humanity, lacking completely in any explanation, which landed on the ears with an uncomfortable thud, he looked up from his notes awkwardly and stared blankly, waiting for applause. After an uncomfortable moment, people began to clap. "This guy's a fascist," Chesterfield whispered to me as everybody stood up and cheered. "No, he's an anarchist," Drexella replied, glaring at him. She obviously admired Rosenberg's philosophy. After the applause died down, he came down and spoke to people from the audience individually, starting with the woman at the extreme right of our row in the front. I recognized her from the previous night's news report as Dame Marcia Martina, the Lord Mayor of the city. Their warm handshake, which morphed into a hug, indeed indicated that they were quote chummy. Rosenberg made his way down the row and soon found his way to Drexella, whom he uncomfortably allowed to hug him. I stood staring at them, wondering how they knew each other, and wondering what I would say to him when I got the chance to touch his sweaty palm. But I didn't have to worry about that. The problem solved itself. In a stunning turn of events, Rosenberg, who had not looked in my direction this entire time, let alone made eye contact, all of a sudden turned towards me and stared me in the face directly and deliberately. He had a mischievous expression, a small amount of nervousness mixed with a large amount of excitement. "Drexella, how do you know Pamela Auger?" he said. "You never cease to surprise me with your interesting personal connections. Aren't you going to introduce me?" He held out a hand for shaking. I grabbed it for a single shake and then let go, staring at them both confusedly, panicking, but still trying to smile. I lied to Drexella about my name. How did Rosenberg know it? I thought. "I have your book about the Templar idol and your translation of the Hammer Purgstall text," he said. "It was amazing how you found those artifacts right here in London, in the museum." I couldn't believe it. The sixth most wealthy man in the world was reading my self-published books. For a moment I was flattered. Then I thought more about the implications of what he had said. Can there be any doubt that everything I've experienced since I arrived here has been connected since accepting Leopold's bizarre invitation? The disappearance of the Mette coffer from the museum, my kidnapping, the underground bull sacrifice, a forced liver divination at Stratford House, the video of castration and child rape sent to MI5, the murder of the agency's director, Drexella alerting us to the opening of the Mithraeum, and Rosenberg reading my book. I looked to Chesterfield for help, but he was just staring at Rosenberg in shock. "How about meeting me and some friends for a dinner party we're having tonight? It's just next door. You can autograph my books. I actually have them sitting in my office here. I'll bring them tonight." For a moment, I let myself consider that maybe I was being paranoid to suspect him of nefarious deeds. After all, it was Leopold/Thomas who was undeniably guilty. The evidence against Rosenberg was still technically circumstantial. Maybe, I thought, this trip will finally open things up for my career, just like I'd hoped it would. But I shook off my ego response and listened to my fear. You're going to get raped and killed, and nobody will ever know what happened to you, I thought more sensibly. As long as I can bring my friend, sure, I said, grabbing Chesterfield's hand. Of course, he responded. Who's this? The question was directed at me, obviously prompting me to introduce him. But Drexella butted in. That's Agent Chesterfield from MI5, she said. He's a cutie, isn't he? She winked at him. He recoiled, but tried to hide it. Rosenberg smiled in amusement. I'm very sorry to hear about Kumpindar. Hope you catch the guy, he said. Then he turned to me. It's a date then. I'll see you at 5 o'clock. Just go to the new court building at St. Swithin's Lane, right behind the St. Stephen Church. It's just off Walbrook, right behind us. Give your name to the front desk when you get there. You're still coming to the ping-pong tournament, aren't you? Drexella asked him. Oh, you know it, he answered enthusiastically. I'm bringing friends. And with that, he moved on to shake more hands. Chapter 20. Equinox of the Gods. Hail, ye twin warriors about the pillars of the world, for your time is nigh at hand. My left hand is empty, for I have crushed an universe, and naught remains. Aleister Crowley, The Book of the Law. Knowing that we absolutely could not consume any of the food at Rosenberg's party, Chesterfield and I opted for a pub lunch at the Green Man, right across Queen Victoria Street. It was inside of another office building that had a remarkable triangular courtyard built in the center of it. We enjoyed fish and chips while we tried to come to grips with all that had just happened. Doesn't it seem strange that Rosenberg's having his party in another office building? I asked. Why not his own? Surely he has space to entertain guests. It's probably his friend the Lord Mayor who is throwing the party for him, Chesterfield said. Why do you say that? I asked. Wouldn't the party be at Mansion House then? She hardly spends much time there, said Chesterfield. She's usually at Newcourt from what I've heard, and it's hard to beat the skybox at Newcourt for entertaining billionaires. It was built for that. It has the best view in the area. I stared at him, waiting for a fuller explanation, since I obviously didn't know what he was talking about. Finally, he continued. Newcourt is the site of the Rothschild Empire in London. They've lived and run their business from that very site since the 1800s. They used to fix the price of gold there every day, before the Bullion Association started doing it next door. And Marcia Martina is a Rothschild heiress. She married into the family. Her son Crispin works for Rosenberg as his right-hand man. I see, I said, whipping my laptop out of my bag and setting it up at the table. What are you looking up? Asked Chesterfield. I'm going to look at the site on Google Maps again. I dialed it up and stared at the Superman logo-shaped plot of land with the new court building labeled simply Rothschilds just east of it. I wonder why Paris isn't answering his phone, said Chesterfield, who had just tried to call him. Surely he isn't still getting grilled by Miss Equitone. Maybe I should check on him after all. Maybe it's safe. All of a sudden there was a dramatic change in the atmosphere of the room. The music was switched off. The TV, which had been tuned to Rosenberg's financial news network with the sound muted, was simultaneously turned up. Several people moved to stand closer to the television. Apparently, it was a very bad day on the stock market so far. The news showed people on the floors of the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, and the Euronext Exchange in Amsterdam running around in a panic. What's going on? I asked. France left the Eurozone, said the man to my left, and the president says they're going to default on their debt. The euro's collapsing. As we stood there watching the European project fall apart, a scream was heard from the back of the pub. It was a woman seated near the window. A man had just jumped from a balcony onto the pavement below. Deliberately, she said. He laid face down on the ground of the building's central courtyard with a pool of blood around him. Just then, Chesterfield received a text from Paris. He showed me what it said. Don't come into the office and don't call. Well, I guess it's not safe after all, he said. And he sank into an anxious quietude, tapping his feet compulsively with his hands tucked crossways under his armpits. I knew what he was thinking. He was worried about his country, and his partner, and his cat. So with no particular place to go until 5 p.m., we sat there watching the world's economy collapse on Rosenberg TV, drinking Shirley Temples, while the businessmen around us freaked out and drank themselves silly. We watched the Paramedics come and scrape up the dead guy on the pavement while a news crew filmed it. We saw the news report on this and several other suicides related to the market crash. Many of the people in the bar were torn between fear of the unknown future and excitement, even glee, at watching a political entity they despised finally kick the bucket. Some were morose, having obviously lost their investments. Some knew they would be losing their jobs soon because of this. All were nervous, rightly, about price volatility. They knew that the chain reaction around the world would be causing all sorts of catastrophic issues as investors freaked out about the likelihood of a currency crisis in Europe and the uncertainty of trade agreements. Some of the pundits on TV were smirking wryly at rumors trending on Twitter alleging that the events were caused by a curse that the markets had brought upon themselves. For the first time ever, Good Friday and Easter Monday had been removed from the list of national bank holidays in the USA, the UK, and the EU. A decision made by international agreement the previous year based on the projected savings of opportunity costs involved in allowing a 4-day weekend. They did it so that everybody could make more money. Because, hey, more money. Instead, many Catholics and Anglicans agreed that decision may have cost the West a great deal, perhaps even, some suggested, the bursting of the entire decades-old debt bubble that supported its floundering economy. But this is all nonsense based on urban legends, Art Cashin said in a live interview on Rosenberg TV. People say that the Black Friday gold crash in 1869 was on Good Friday, but it was actually September 24th. The last time the New York Stock Exchange was open on Good Friday was March 29, 1907, and the market was up when it closed at the end of the day. But that was the peak of the market that year, countered Seamus Molyneux, a journalist with an Irish accent also being interviewed in the same segment. It went down after that, and the Irish Catholic traders all lamented to the men running the exchange, "We told you not to open on Good Friday." That's recorded at the time. Nobody knew what to make of this superstition. The only thing that was for sure was that nobody had any faith in anything. Not the government, the Queen, or the banks. Certainly not the people, that is, the lazy mob. And not, most useless of all, the Church or God. When the Pope released a statement against global panic, blamed the Eurozone breakup on xenophobia, and lectured the rich of the world not to be greedy during the unfolding crisis, people started throwing food at the TV amid loud jeering. Of course, a lot of these people were also on their cell phones, calling brokers and telling them to move money around. Gold and silver were natural fallbacks, but these were getting ridiculously more expensive by the minute. Or, as the pessimist would see it, currencies were becoming more worthless relative to metal by the minute. The news about France had come just minutes before the price of gold was fixed by the London bullion market at 3 p.m., so it was set by the bankers with the benefit of that knowledge. The FTSE closed 20% down for the day, the biggest one-day loss ever, almost double the previous record, and got shut down 30 minutes early at 4 p.m. Chesterfield's only comment was to point out that Director Pindar's head, mounted on Temple Bar, was directly facing the London Stock Exchange building right across Paternoster Square. I told him it reminded me of a knithing pole, the Norse form of cursing an enemy by pointing the severed head of a horse at his house, mounted on a stick. Then the connection with the imagery of bull sacrifice, specifically the blood baptisms of Siebel's Torobolium rite, was pointed out to us by the headlines used on Rosenberg TV to introduce the latest reports on the global stock market collapse. Bloodbath on Wall Street and Bad Friday. Europa slays the bull. How ironic, I said to Chesterfield. Europa was raped by Zeus in the form of a bull, an event that was commemorated on euro coins. Now the continent, named after her, has killed the bull market. I wondered how Rosenberg is reacting to the news. He said, "There's only one way to find out," I said. At 4:45, we finally left the bar and walked over to New Court to keep our appointment. Little did we know at the time that if we'd stayed another 5 minutes, we would have heard Mr. Rosenberg's public comments on the market breakdown, as he was being interviewed live on his own network from his own office there in London while we were on our way to meet him at the Rothschild compound next door. We crossed Queen Victoria Street, then past Rosenberg Plaza on the north side. We went down Bucklersbury and across Walbrook, then through a narrow alley in between Mansion House and St. Stephen's, a beautiful Christopher Wren-designed church, almost completely obscured on all sides by tall office buildings. I wanted to go in and check it out for a minute, but the front door was locked, and there was a sign posted saying it was closed for repairs. So we took one more left around one more building, and then we were there, standing in front of the place where the Rothschild family had been running their global finance empire for over 2 centuries. We opened the front door and walked into the reception area, which was a gigantic, virtually empty space with a ceiling oddly identical to the floor, looking like blonde wood paneling. We found the elevators, but they were locked. Behind us, someone cleared his throat. It was a Hawaiian-looking man with broad shoulders, dressed in a dark suit, with a white cord dangling from his left ear. He was standing at the security desk. We walked up to him. "Hi, I'm Pamela Auger," I said, "and this is Agent Chesterfield, I know," he said, interrupting me. He showed us a touchscreen tablet he was carrying, with pictures of us both, as well as several others. I recognized mine as my Facebook profile picture. The one of Chesterfield matched the one on his security service badge. I wondered how they got it. Chesterfield looked alarmed. The man motioned for us to autograph a sign-in sheet on his desk. "Let me help you with the elevator," the guard said. He used a card carried in a lanyard around his neck to unlock the elevator, then punched the floor, which I don't recall. When the doors opened, he stepped in with us and rode all the way up. When the doors opened again, we found ourselves in yet another vast, empty room. There was almost nothing in it, except one long, wooden table positioned a few feet away from the far wall, at which several people were already seated. One of them was Rosenberg. He was talking to Marcia Martina. Most remarkable of all were the walls around us. They were incredibly tall, all glass, with a magnificent view of the city on all sides of us. It was like being on top of Mount Olympus. Indeed, I'm certain that's what it was designed to feel like. The side that the table was placed on looked out over the roof of Rosenberg Plaza, which, at only 10 stories tall, was quite a ways beneath us. The setting sun reflected off the sunroof with a reddish-pink glow. "This must be the skybox," Chesterfield mentioned, I thought to myself. Chesterfield made his arm into a bow, into which I inserted my own, and then he led me over to where Rosenberg was seated. We all said hello again, and then he introduced us to the Lord Mayor. To her right was Crispin Martina, her son, and the Chief Operating Officer for Rosenberg Inc. UK. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired, comely and ectomorphic, wearing a finely tailored suit the color of Egyptian blue, he resembled a twink from the cover of a men's fashion magazine. He couldn't have possibly been more than 22 years old from the looks of him. That's quite an impressive position for someone so young, I thought. I have since learned that he was the youngest person to ever hold such a title in a major corporation. On the other side of the table was Mark Wetzel, the new editor of the Financial Times. He was white and chubby with thinning gray hair and a pinstriped suit. He looked to be about 60. Finally, to Rosenberg's left was a homely-looking 12-year-old girl, wearing white culottes and a white polo shirt, with her permed hair in a ponytail, and she had braces on her teeth. Rosenberg introduced her as Philippine, his daughter. "Oh yes," I said as I took her hand. "I've heard about your steeplechases." She looked very shy and uncomfortable, which was how I felt in a room full of financial elites, so I thought that breaking the ice with her first would be easiest. She blushed and turned her gaze away from me, smiling limply at nothing. The Lord Mayor grabbed me by the arm and whispered, "Don't get her started. The only thing that empty-headed girl ever talks about is horses." We sat down next to Wetzel. A young, dark-haired white male in a black tuxedo came and poured us champagne from a bottle that probably cost more than I had made in the previous tax year. Everybody except for Philippine looked like they were already somewhat drunk. "Blake already told us a little bit about you guys, particularly you, Miss Auger," said Wetzel. "Sounds like you've done some interesting work." I smiled. "I saw you two walking up to the building," said Ms. Martina, sniffing as she spoke. "I was just coming back from the lavatory on the other side of the room. I looked out the window, and I saw you walking down St. Stephen's Row." She sniffed again and smiled. "Cocaine?" I thought. It looked like it. Her nose was red. "You could have taken the secret tunnels," said Rosenberg. "I should have told you about them." He and Marcia both laughed. "What do you mean?" I said. "There are tunnels connecting all of these buildings, and others," Marcia said. "From Newcourt to St. Stephen's, from St. Stephen's to Mansion House, from Mansion House to the Bank of England. All built by my dead husband's ancestors, of course, to make it easier to control everybody." Ms. Martina laughed again. "You're joking?" I asked. Not at all, said Crispin. And Rosenberg Plaza is now part of the grid too. I looked at Chesterfield. He did not look amused. He grimaced at the Lord Mayor. The silence was palpable. Oh, bloody hell, said Ms. Martina. I forgot we had MI5 in the house tonight. All this has been cleared with the city, I presume, said Chesterfield, making notes on his black leather notepad. Martina leaned in and squinted at him. Darling, this family is the city, she bragged. She took another sip of her champagne. So what do you use really these tunnels for? I asked. You'll find out tonight, said Rosenberg. We're going on a special tour later on. Oh, really? I said. I'm not sure how long I can stay, though. Oh, you don't want to miss this, said Mr. Wetzel. The first ritual in a properly restored ancient temple in London for 1,300 years. When will you get another chance like that? Oh no, a ritual. I thought. The hair on my neck stood up as I thought about my last experience with a ritual inside London's secret tunnels. What's he talking about? Asked Chesterfield. He turned to Rosenberg. I thought the Mithraeum belonged to the people. It's a piece of British heritage that just so happens to be inside your building. It's not your personal playground. We're just going to have a little fun, said Crispin. It's a party. Lighten. Chesterfield looked at his champagne glass, still full, and put his notebook in his pocket. Rosenberg deftly pivoted the conversation. You know, Dutch businessman Eric Ubels, whom I consulted on the design of the plaza, has said that in the future all parts of a building will be connected to all the other parts. What's more, he said that all of the buildings in a city will be connected to each other. Tunnels are one thing, and that's been going on for centuries here in England. But they will also be doing things like sharing electricity, which they will be generating on-site for each other. And they will be sharing data about how the buildings are being used. The City of London in the future really will be a boy house with many mansions like the New Jerusalem. I think that's exciting, and I like to think that Rosenberg Plaza is helping to lead this movement. Well, we got Woden Energy that consulting contract, said Martina, convinced the aldermen that it's worth the investment. Now we can get them to agree to fund the things we've already been doing. So it'll be done months ahead of schedule, which will impress them and keep them handing out funds. Woden Energy is doing for cities what Eric Ubels is doing for buildings, Wetzel explained, seeing my confusion. Networking the streetlights, covering them with sensors, and using the data to make decisions that boost energy efficiency. They call them smart cities. London is on the verge of a new renaissance, said Crispin with pride, looking at his boss with admiration. Rosenberg has been working with the mayor of Greater London on the river restoration project too, which is huge. We're bringing back all the culverted underground rivers, like the Fleet and the Walbrook. We've been building the infrastructure and connecting it to the city's new smart grid. When it's all unveiled, the public will be completely blown away. What will the rivers be used for? I asked. I thought they were all mostly sewers now. They used to be, said Rosenberg, but they closed them over and built other sewers, then mostly abandoned the rivers. They still trickle underground and empty into the Thames. Now, since Ms. Auger here is an expert on occult secrets, I'll tell you a secret about the water system here and let you figure out what it means. Everyone got quiet and scooted in their chairs so that they could lean in closer, except for Philippine. She continued to stare blankly out the window. Rosenberg went on. In the 1200s, they built a conduit between Tyburn Springs, on the current site of Buckingham Palace, and the Walbrook, right up Ludgate Hill where St. Paul's is, to bring fresh drinking water to the merchants in the city. Supposedly, they stopped using it after the Great Fire in 1666. But the engineers from Woden Energy explored the old conduit and found a tiny tube running along the length of the whole thing, from directly beneath Buckingham Palace to where the Walbrook meets Bucklersbury on the northern side of my Mithraeum before turning west. From the corner of my eye, I saw Chesterfield wince when Rosenberg said, my Mithraeum. What do you mean, a tube? Said Wetzel. Like a plastic tube? Oh, number 2.7 miles of Burmese glass, surrounded by plain white PVC pipes, he said. Burmese glass? You mean that stuff they used to make from uranium oxide and tincture of gold? That was Queen Victoria's favorite. It's beautiful and so radiant in UV light. She collected tons of it, but usually dishes and figurines, not plumbing pipes. Yes, well, there may have been other reasons why she had the company in Massachusetts that manufactured it make so much of it for her. The glass is useful for maintaining the chemical composition of the fluid running through it. I wouldn't be surprised if that company itself was secretly contracted to produce some of these pipes, and somebody is still making them now. Certain sections of the tube line have obviously been replaced quite recently. You mean it's in current use? I asked. Yep, he said, still running with fluid. Fluid? Everybody said all at once. Don't tell me you didn't know, said Rosenberg to Martina with a mocking smile. Then he turned around and gave the same look to Crispin. Or you. The young man and his mother looked at each other and shrugged. But Rosenberg was right. They were playing dumb. Blake, whatever are you talking about? Said Ms. Martina. Do you remember what Edmund Mortimer called the Walbrook River in Henry VI, when he sat upon the London stone and proclaimed himself Lord Mayor? She laughed. He called it a pissing conduit, she said. Which it was. Then he declared that the river should run with nothing but claret wine for the first year of his reign, her son added, swilling down the last of his champagne. He called the servants for more. So what's your point? Said Chesterfield. Is there sewer water still running through this narrow tube in the conduit for some reason? No, not sewer water per se, Rosenberg answered. Pure golden streams of urine, obviously collected directly from the source, without contamination. Once again, I thought about the toilets at Rosenberg Plaza, and my speculation that Rosenberg might have been generating energy from human waste products, or he could have been using it for any number of other esoteric alchemical workings. Or maybe he was a sick pervert who liked to bath in or drink other people's piss. Now he was telling us that someone else was doing the same, somebody rich like him with access to the remains of the conduit. He implied that he thought the Rothschilds at least knew about it. Perhaps they did. Marcia and Crispin seemed to be getting uncomfortable. Has the site of Tyburn Springs always been the location of the royal residence? I asked. No, said Wetzel. It belonged to Edward the Confessor, but then a lot of other people owned it before they built Buckingham Palace in the 19th century. An image flashed into my mind just as a tingle went down my spine. A sure sign that I was getting one of my intuitions. It was a picture I'd seen before of the river of life flowing from beneath God's throne. This is the water that the righteous drink from to gain eternal life. The message is clear. Immortality can be gained from consuming the bodily substance of immortals. God, in the Old Testament, is shown consuming the flesh and blood of sacrifices, licking them up with tongues of fire. But while they might eat kosher meat, blood he forbade to the Hebrew people, as it contained the life. For the same reason, Adam and Eve were booted from paradise to prevent them from gaining access to the tree of life, which would make them live forever. The fluid exchange is this. God drinks the water of life, blood generally, from the altars of his worshippers. He then feeds the tree of life in paradise with the rivers that issue from beneath where he sits. The tree grows the fruit that brings life, and that fruit is offered back to the worshipper in the form of the vivifying flesh and blood of Jesus. What I was now hearing about from Rosenberg was an exchange in which urine was being piped from a location directly beneath Buckingham Palace and into the business district, right to the front door of the Rothschilds. That is, right to the family that historically funded the government which paid the royal salary during the 19th century, when this special royal pissing conduit may have first been built. For all I knew, they were still doing so. Perhaps royal urine has a particular value for them somehow, I thought. So, said Rosenberg, breaking the silence, since you don't know anything about this, do you think your father-in-law does? It was directed at the Lord Mayor. Look, everybody knows these freaks are dirty to the core. And richer than the Pope. So if you're telling me that my in-laws have a private pipeline carrying prostitute pee for their golden shower orgies here at Newcourt, don't expect me to be surprised. I've heard worse. Much worse. She then turned to her son, glared at him, and walked off to the restroom again. Crispin turned to Rosenberg looking hurt. He spoke. Blake, I do believe you are violating the law of hospitality, and there is still a token between you and my family that has not been satisfied. Don't accuse me of that, said Rosenberg, pointing in Crispin's face and staring him directly in the eyes. You know I take that very seriously. Wetzel, in an attempt to break the uncomfortable mood, leaned past me and asked Chesterfield how the investigation of Pindar's murder was going. Oh, we're working on it, the agent responded. A total non-answer. He changed the subject again. I heard your paper moved back into Bracken House round the corner. Yep, said Wetzel. Same classy old building. We just had it outfitted for the modern age. Chesterfield turned to me. Bracken House is across the square from St. Paul's. It's the one with the zodiac clock on the front featuring the face of Winston Churchill as the sun. It's the historic home of the Financial Times, but they moved out for a few years while the place was refurbished. I remembered seeing that place when we were walking to the murder scene the night before. Today's been a hell of a day for your paper, I imagine, said Chesterfield. Where do you think it's all going? Directly down the toilet, the editor responded. The euro's obviously trash, which may help the pound in the immediate, but unless you're these blokes, you won't feel the benefit, he said, pointing to Marcia, Crispin, and Blake with a broad swirl of his finger. So you guys aren't suffering at all from Europe's collapse? I said. Are you kidding? Ms. Martina said, laughing as she sat back down at the table again. We caused it. That is to say, we refrained from propping them up any longer. Going gult, as they say. The people won't accept austerity, they refuse to face facts, so we can't keep doling out free credit to states any longer. But we've all been hoarding gold for months, so we won't go hungry. Quite the contrary. We're on the precipice of what you might call the Great Reaping. She winked at Rosenberg. He smiled emptily. I could never imagine that the world's elite actually refer to themselves as we, the same way we non-elites refer to them as they, I thought to myself. Their arrogance was truly amazing, a combination of cinematic and surreal. Pamela, you remember the story of Joseph and his brothers in Genesis, right? Said Rosenberg. More or less, I answered. Why? Have you ever thought about how it tells the story of the process by which a people become enslaved through usury? Joseph's brothers come from Canaan to Egypt, looking to buy food during a famine. They don't know he's the brother they sold into slavery some time ago. They find that, because of his great psychic insight, which predicted the famine, he's been storing up grain for 7 years in Pharaoh's granaries. I nodded. He continued. He plies them with freebies. He makes them think the food was free because the money they bought it with magically reappeared in their sacks afterwards. He takes one of them captive as collateral, Simeon. Then he tries to trick them into giving up their littlest brother, Benjamin, as a slave to him, by falsely accusing him of the theft of his silver divination cup. Where is all this going, Blake? Said Miss Martina. You know I despise the Bible. She yawned and sipped her champagne. Rosenberg rolled his eyes and kept talking. Then he convinced Pharaoh to give his brothers a good slice of the best land in Egypt, and lots more free stuff besides. They lived there fat and happy for 2 years, until the famine spread to Egypt as well. Then the true process of enslavement began. He cleared his throat and smiled eerily. First, Joseph, on behalf of Pharaoh, took all the money from both the Egyptian and the Canaanite people in exchange for bread from Pharaoh's granary. Then the money failed in the land. All of the coins of real value being in the hands of the Pharaoh now, anything coined as money from that point on would not be accepted by the market as a store of value. We all know that. Crispin, Marcia, and Mr. Wetzel all smiled, now picking up on the similarities between the Bible story and the present situation. People like me and the Rothschilds have all the gold now, Rosenberg continued. The coming breakaway European states can print their own money all they want, but nobody abroad will accept it, and the market already knows it. But let them try, said Marcia. I really want to see them try. Returning to the story, said Rosenberg, annoyed at the interruption. Joseph next took cattle from both the Egyptian natives and the Canaanite aliens, his own brethren, in exchange for more bread. That lasted only a year. After that, there was nothing left but for the people to offer up their lands and their bodies for slaves in exchange for mere bread. Now they were all slaves to Pharaoh, with Joseph in the real seat of power as vizier. But the Canaanites were the happy slaves, because they got special treatment from Joseph on account of their relation to him. The aliens grew more prosperous and more numerous in their condition of slavery than the native Egyptians, and this bred contempt. So when a new pharaoh came to the throne, he instituted a policy of treating the Canaanite aliens more harshly. He stood up with his eyes closed and his arms raised up, bent at the elbow, his palms turned outward towards us. This is how the condition of harsh slavery in Egypt came upon the children of Israel. This is also how the Egyptians themselves became slaves to their pharaoh. It was because of the financial machinations of their brother Joseph, wily like Hermes the thief. I've actually thought for some time that the figure of Joseph is a masked form of Thoth, or Jehuti, the Egyptian Hermes, I said. Jude also. Well, yes, Jehuti. Sounds a lot like Yehudi, doesn't it? Rosenberg agreed. Using confidence tricks to gain wealth and power, to enslave the masses through money. That's what both Joseph and Hermes were known for. And that's the popular stereotype of the money-grubbing Jew that has endured for almost 2 millennia. Because they keep living up to it, howled Miss Martina. Rosenberg shot her a look of disapproval. She looked away from him towards me. I was married to one, so I can say it, she chuckled. I've counted his money. I know what I'm talking about. Well, there's one more parallel with the anti-Semitic stereotype. Joseph was originally a slave, an alien, but came to rule the land de facto by ingratiating himself with the royal house, by making himself indispensable. He took Dale Carnegie's advice, joked Wetzel. He used his mind's eye to gain intelligence that gave him power, because it was useful. Think on that, Miss Auger, said Rosenberg, raising his eyebrow at me. Why? I asked. Before he could answer, there was a flurry of movement around us. It was dizzying and disorienting. It all happened so quickly I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't actually see any of the servants carrying the platters. When the movement passed, I looked down and saw a shiny silver plate in front of me. Well, there's one more parallel with the anti-Semitic stereotype. Joseph was originally a slave, an alien, but came to rule the land de facto by ingratiating himself with the royal house, by making himself indispensable. He took Dale Carnegie's advice, joked Wetzel. He used his mind's eye to gain intelligence that gave him power, because it was useful. Think on that, Miss Auger, said Rosenberg, raising his eyebrow at me. Why? I asked. Before he could answer, there was a flurry of movement around us. It was dizzying and disorienting. It all happened so quickly I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't actually see any of the servants carrying the platters, but when the movement passed, I looked down and saw a shiny silver plate in front of me, with a tiny bird on it, baked with a caramelized sauté. We each had one. The plates were all different colors and, it looked like, made from different materials. But now Rosenberg was missing from the table. His wine glass was also gone, and there was no setting for him at the table. Where'd Blake go? Asked Wetzel. He looked at Philippine, who looked up for the first time in 20 minutes. She shrugged her shoulders. I noticed that the sun was now almost totally gone over the horizon, and the moon was visible behind Philippine. Although it was not quite full, it loomed large and seemed to hang down very low. He's probably gone to the toilet, I imagine, answered Crispin. So what are we having anyway? Marcia asked her son. I don't know, he responded. I let Blake tell the kitchen what to make. Oh, right, Blake ordering our family servants around. As always, she sighed. She took a bite of her bird. She swallowed it, but slowly, reluctantly, looking both disgusted and surprised. Oh, right, now this is gross, she said. What the hell is this? It tastes like an arse. No kidding, said Wetzel, who had sampled his as well and pushed it away in disgust. That's foul. He snorted a laugh at his own joke. Get it? Foul? I put a piece of it on my fork and sniffed it. It smelled like spoiled milk and sulfur. I looked at Philippine. She was dutifully eating it, but shuddered as she did so. Then I looked at Crispin. He was eating his too, with dislike, in very small bites. Marcia turned around to complain to the servants, but she found none. We were now alone in that vast, empty room, with no sign of the guest of honor who had ordered this mystery meal. Maybe Rosenberg went to go tell the staff that they forgot my plate, said Chesterfield, although it doesn't look like I'm missing out on anything good. I looked, and sure enough, he had no plate. No, he must be in the lavatory, said Marcia, angry. She stumbled drunkenly over to the unisex toilet room and walked right in, calling his name. A few seconds later, she came out. He's not there either, she announced, coming back to her seat. You don't like your food? Rosenberg's voice came from the other side of the table. He was standing next to his daughter, who sat motionless, staring at the bones on her plate, having eaten every scrap of the bird's bitter flesh. Everyone was startled. Then Marcia and Wetzel laughed. Yeah, send it back and order a pizza, Blake. answered Marcia. This is the worst. I've already had a pizza today, he said. Not that kind of pizza, said Marcia, snickering at what appeared to be an inside joke. Don't reject my offering, friends, said Rosenberg, addressing us all. True, Crispin kindly provided the champagne, and let us sit at the table of his esteemed family's house. But these birds I caught myself and put myself in great peril to do so. Seriously? Said Marcia. Honestly, I didn't know you liked to hunt. I thought you hated firearms. No, he hates peasants having firearms, whispered Wetzel, oblivious to how weird things were getting. I didn't shoot them, he responded. I had the servants slaughter them. He inhaled sharply. Please nourish your bodies with this flesh, Rosenberg continued to implore. At least enjoy the sweet livers. That's the best part. Upon hearing the words, sweet livers, Chesterfield stiffened up next to me. I could feel his eyes upon me, but Rosenberg now stared at me as well. Come on, Miss Auger, he said. Eat the liver. It's the best part. Don't do it, Pamela, said Chesterfield. You don't have to. We can leave. Not until you've eaten, shouted Rosenberg. As he said this, he leaned forward, slammed his fist on the table, and stared angrily at me, his face becoming red. I don't know if it was a hallucination, like so many of the things I witnessed from this point onward, but to me it seemed as if his eyes began to glow red as well, as his stare pierced me through my skull. I felt myself swaying in my seat. As if I had no will of my own, I picked up my fork and knife, tore the bird open, located what looked like a liver, and stuck it in my mouth. In my peripheral vision, I saw Marcia and Mark doing the same. At that moment, Chesterfield got up and ran across the room to the elevator we had arrived in. He punched the down button. Everybody was looking at him, so I took the opportunity to spit out my bite of the unknown bird into my champagne glass, which I then covered with a napkin. Come on, follow me, Pamela, he shouted, beckoning me with his hand. But then he looked at the elevator button and the digital display next to it, which was supposed to tell you what floor the elevator was currently on as it moved up and down. However, something was wrong. He pressed the button frantically several more times, shouting, "Fuck, fuck!" Then he stormed over to the table again. Tell me why the elevator's locked, he demanded of Rosenberg. The man just sneered at him. Then Chesterfield addressed the Martinez. How do we get out of here? Oh, don't overreact, said Marcia. She walked over to the elevator. It should be working, she said. When she saw that it wasn't, she tried pressing an intercom button next to the elevator. Hello, James? Hello, Teddy? Anybody? There was apparently no answer. She walked back to her desk and took her phone out of her purse. Her bag looked like it cost more than my mother's house, but she had the same model smartphone as I did. It didn't do her any good, though. Bloody hell, I can't even get a signal. What's going on? She shouted to Crispin. He shrugged, then gave Rosenberg a pleading look. Nobody's going anywhere until we've all eaten, Rosenberg shouted. I think we're done, said Wetzel. We've all had a bite. We all tried it. Thank you, Blake. Maybe we're just not hungry. Let's do something else now. He was trying to calm his friend down. I'm not done, Rosenberg countered. Where's your plate? Asked Crispin. Should I tell the servants? I'm eating mine raw, Rosenberg interrupted. He reached down and picked up something on the floor next to his feet, which had been obscured from my view by the table. It was covered in a black cloth. He placed it in the center of the table. I heard coos and a flutter of wings. Not again, I said to myself. I don't want to see another animal die. But of course, I couldn't stop him. He ripped the cover off the birdcage, revealing a raven, which he took out with his hand, gently, putting it on the tabletop. He walked around and flapped its wings helplessly. They were clipped. I thought to look away, but I wasn't fast enough. With sudden ferocity, Rosenberg grabbed the bird and tore its head off with his bare hands, then tipped the neck towards his mouth and sucked down the blood as it spurted out. At that moment, I heard a sonic boom and felt something like a shockwave. This was followed by the sound of metal crunching and scraping together. It didn't seem to be coming from the sky, which became noticeably darker in that instant, as if someone had put a light filter over it. Also, the moon drew down lower in the sky. The crunching sound turned into a high-pitched whine, then a low, long moan like a foghorn. It sounded like a concert from an orchestra of 100 waterphones. "Ah," said Rosenberg, wiping his mouth and gasping like he had just taken a refreshing drink on a hot summer day. "That's the sound of the sky beginning to fall in earnest. Now let us commence with the supreme rite, to bring about the baptism of wisdom." He threw the desiccated raven's headless body into the middle of the table and dropped the head where he stood. I wasn't operating at full capacity, so I wasn't reacting as I normally would to these abnormal occurrences. But I wasn't as bad off as most of the other guests. Indeed, they all appeared to be going through an almost lycanthropic transformation before my eyes. Across from me, Marcia had pushed her seat back from the table and now sat back in her chair, with her blue evening dress hiked up to her crotch, which she was now rubbing lasciviously through her panties, fully visible. She was biting her lip hard, and blood trickled out of the corner of her mouth. She cackled like a witch. Presently Crispin stood up and kissed Rosenberg passionately on the mouth. Rosenberg reciprocated, then violently wrenched the young man's arm behind his back. He bent him over the table and began dry humping his ass. Next, Mr. Wetzel stood up, an evil gleam now in his beady eyes. He walked over behind Philippine, grabbed her by the hair bun, and jerked her head up. Her eyes were solid whites without pupils. I'd never seen anything like it before. Her jaw dropped open. Her tongue began to flutter. She started to utter some strange glossolalia that I didn't recognize as human language. But then Wetzel slammed his right foot up on the table in front of her, unzipped his pants, and silenced her with a thrust of his penis. Her speech turned into gagging and slurping. That lasted a few seconds before Rosenberg reached out and shoved him away from her. "Don't shoot your load just yet," he admonished. "You'll need all your potency for the ritual." Then he turned and addressed the group, bellowing, "Let us now descend to the sacred caverns. Last week was the spring equinox, but this weekend we shall celebrate the true equinox of the gods." Over his shoulder, I caught sight of the moon again. Then from behind it, I swear, I saw 5 bright lights emerge, each a different hue, and just hover there. They looked like stars, but they behaved like UFOs. I could tell that they were looking at me, at us. I stood up and stumbled backward. Chesterfield grabbed me from behind and steadied me, immobilizing me with his arms. "Do you see the stars moving outside?" I whispered in his ear. "Just pretend you're possessed and make out with me," he whispered back. Understanding his meaning, I kissed his neck and growled like a dog. He began fondling my breasts. Rosenberg walked over to the elevator now, with his friends following behind him like a procession of screaming banshees. He hit the intercom button. "Miles, you can come up now," he said. Miles? I thought. How many servants in England are named Miles? That's so cliché. Why not Jeeves? Why not Mr. Belvedere? Even in this insane crisis, under the slight influence of whatever was in the raven meat I spit out, my mind was still able to calm itself by telling itself stupid jokes, like it had so many times before. I watched the numbers on the display change as the elevator climbed up to our floor from the bottom. When it got there, the doors opened, and there was Miles, Leopold Black's chauffeur, with a gun in his hand again, pointed out towards us. "Hello, Miles," said Rosenberg. "Where are the others?" "They're waiting for you in the temple, sir," he replied. Rosenberg gestured towards us, and we all piled into the elevator. Miles punched a code on a keypad next to the elevator's main set of buttons, and we started going down. The others were shrieking loudly, still busy molesting each other. There was enough noise that I could safely whisper something to Miles, who was standing right next to me. "So you and Leopold and the rest of the butchers were in it together all along," I said. "No surprise, I guess. Now what are you guys going to do us?" But he just stared ahead like a beefeater on duty, holding his gun with the barrel pointed out towards the elevator door. Meanwhile, the elevator continued to descend, down, down, down. We went past B1 and B2, the 2 basement levels listed on the main set of buttons. Then we kept going, into what seemed like a bottomless pit. Chapter 21. Torobolium. According to one account dating from the 1830s, the Rothschilds owed their fortune to the possession of a mysterious Hebrew talisman that enabled Nathan Rothschild, the founder of the London House, to become the Leviathan of the money markers of Europe. Nigel Ferguson, The Ascent of Money. When the elevator opened, we walked out into a hallway with stone floors and walls. The walls were lined with torches lighting the way. At the end of the corridor was an opening leading off to the left, and a statue of Harpocrates, the Egyptian god of silence, as a naked young boy. He held his index finger to his lips in his signature pose, with his other hand covering his crotch. I knew he was equated with Eros in Hellenistic syncretism, and was bound by an oath to keep the secrets of his mother Aphrodite's many sex crimes. I could only imagine what his presence in this hallway presaged, but my imagination was not extreme enough to predict what actually did happen. All of us came out of the elevator, except for one person, Chesterfield. He tried, but Rosenberg pushed him back in there, and then instructed Miles to shoot him in the head. Miles pointed the gun, and Chesterfield cringed, bracing himself. But then Rosenberg changed his mind, saying that Chesterfield might come in handy later. The elevator door was shut, and then Rosenberg punched in a code that locked it in place. Poor Chesterfield was stuck in there. I was blindfolded by Miles again, just like last time I was in a tunnel with him, but was led by him arm in arm down the hall, instead of being forced to leave. As we walked, Rosenberg and his friends were hooting, hollering, and whooping like animals. Then we stopped abruptly. Someone, Rosenberg I presume, grabbed my arm and put my left hand upon a door handle. Then Rosenberg spoke to me. "Pamela, my Criphius, tell me, can you see it in your mind's eye yet? What will we find in here when we open this door?" I recognized the word Criphius from my online reading about Mithras. It literally meant occultist, and it was named by Franz Cumont as the title of the first degree of the Mithraic Brotherhood. However, this was based on a single archaeological find. All other evidence showed that the name of the first degree was Corax, meaning raven. Allegedly, a raven had played the role of divine messenger, Mercury's job. It was sent by the sun god to Mithras, instructing him to have the bull slayed. Pondering this, I then realized that Rosenberg wanted me to use my innate clairvoyant abilities to play the role of messenger for him. I was there to do divination on command, just like what Leopold and the Butchers' Society had kidnapped me for. That was probably why he had invited me to his party, and why he was keeping me alive. So I had better find a way to perform, I thought. I couldn't see anything in my mind's eye, but I did hear a male but inhuman eldritch-sounding voice in my head, and it gave me a message. The lion, the witch, and the wardrobes. I repeated this to Rosenberg, and he laughed. "Good, good, you'll do," he said, taking off my blindfold. He opened the door, revealing a dimly lit room with old light fixtures and 3 wardrobes sitting next to each other on the far wall. 2 were closed, and the one on the right was open. Inside there were what appeared to be theater costumes, and in front of the wardrobes stood 2 people already in costume. One of these people was wearing a black robe and a mask of a lion's face. The other was an old Caucasian woman wearing a white gown, a red cape, and a large white hat that resembled a champagne cork. She had white foundation caked on her face like a clown, with thick black eye makeup and bright red lipstick. She smiled. "Pater Noster," she said to Rosenberg as she held out her arms for him. "Hello, Matrideum Concivia, planter of the garden," he said back to her. He kissed her on the hand, smiling back at her. "So this is Concivia," I said to myself, "and she's here as a priestess tonight, but not for the Anglican Church." Rosenberg then turned to the man in the lion's mask. "Is everything ready with the bull and the butchers?" he asked. "Absolutely, Father," he said. I recognized the voice. It was Leopold. So even the pretense that Leopold and the butchers were working against Rosenberg was a ruse, just like everything else about him, I thought. They're all in league together, and this entire thing has been a setup against me from the beginning. We all got suited up too. Each one of us had a face covering and a black robe tied that opened in the front, tied with a silver cord. Everybody dressed himself except for me. I got help from Concivia and Miles. They gave me a blackbird's mask, like the ones we had seen on the Easter Sunday film. Crispin wore a golden headband that suspended a white linen veil over his face. Marcia Martina put on Roman soldier's plumed helmet and a plain white mask. Wetzel wore a golden sun face. Most put their robes on over their clothes, but Philippine, her pupils now returned to the front of her eyeballs, somberly stripped off her clothes first, having obviously been given instructions ahead of time. Instead of a mask, she wore a black lace veil. Rosenberg donned his Phrygian smurf hat and a mask that resembled the bust of Mithras found at the London Mithraeum. He also took a foot-long iron harp, an ancient type of sickle, that was hanging on a hook on the back wall of one of the wardrobes. He holstered it with his belt. Then Miles opened the door to the hallway again, and everyone filed out, with Rosenberg leading the way. Just to the right of the door of the wardrobe room, the hallway ended. The long, dark corridor we had come from stretched out into darkness on our left and ended. Right there was a stone spiral staircase leading up. Rosenberg took a torch off the wall with his free hand and started going up. Everyone followed. I couldn't see where it was leading until Rosenberg got to the top and drew his harp. He then used it to flip open a hatch door above him, torchlight, and some ominous piano music poured through the opening. He holstered the blade and climbed up. Rosenberg put his torch through the opening first. Someone above played a triumphant series of notes on a trumpet. Then a white-gloved hand came down from the other side. Rosenberg grabbed it with his free hand and allowed himself to be helped up. A few seconds later, we heard him bellowing loudly, "Hail to the lions!" Then came a reply from a chorus of voices above. "Hail, Father!" We all went up through the hatch as well, except for Miles and Philippine. Miles grabbed the girl by the arm and nudged her with his gun back down the stairs. Then he motioned for me to squeeze past him. When I emerged, I saw that we were in the Mithraeum. Miles shut the door behind me. We had come out of a hole in the floor in the southeast corner of the room, near the altar, which was a recreation of an original feature, as I remembered from reading the plaques on display earlier that day. It was covered by a box on the floor made of stone and about a foot high. The archaeologists who found it thought that it must have contained ritual paraphernalia of some sort, but now the box acted as a portal to a lower chamber, with a door that could be pushed open from below. Miles came up from behind me and shut the door as well as the box lid as soon as he was through. I saw before me a small crowd of about 40 people, some adults, some children, and all male as far as I could tell. They all wore black robes like us, and masks like those worn by several of Rosenberg's friends. There were men in lion masks, men in raven masks, men in Roman soldier helmets, and young boys aged 7 to 12 wearing linen veils like Crispin. Each of these types were lined up in a row together. The ones in the lion masks were using large censers on chains to waft us with incense as we each emerged from the box. The veiled boys were all against the wall on the left, making music. One sat at a piano in the corner, playing the somber tune, right next to the boy holding the trumpet. Against the opposite wall were boys singing dolorously in Latin. But only Rosenberg wore the Liberty cap, Wetzel had the only sun mask, and only Concivia wore the champagne cork hat with the clown makeup. Also, nobody else wore the lacy black veil that Philippine had been wearing. However, there were several people in the congregation who were wearing black veils, just not of lace. These others were made of leather with eye slits cut out, just like the one I had seen on the people who slaughtered the bull beneath Stratford House. But there was one change. Some of the leather veils were marked with a white, waxing crescent moon symbol in front of the mouth. Others were marked with a black, waning moon symbol outlined in white. These must be Leopold's butchers, I thought. I wonder why there are two different kinds. Each of Rosenberg's friends took their place in front of their corresponding groups of congregants. Leopold stood before the lions, and Marcia the soldiers. Wetzel stood in the middle, in between the soldiers and the lions. One of the soldiers grabbed my arm and positioned me in front of the ravens. Concivia Springhole went to stand behind the stone altar, and Rosenberg stood to the left of it. It was not the original short and narrow altar that had been displayed in the Mithraeum earlier. It was a much larger one of roughly hewn stone, the width of a man's length when horizontal, and I recognized it from Wikipedia. It was the one from the church next door, St. Stephen Walbrook, famously made to resemble the one in the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The latter was, by tradition, the place where Abraham almost sacrificed his son. It was also said by Jews to be the even Hashitia, the foundation stone of the universe from which creation radiated outward at the beginning of time. Behind the altar and the priestess was a black curtain, attached to a curtain rod that ran in a circle throughout the room. I hadn't remembered seeing that last time I was in there, so they must have set it up just before the ritual. All of the informational plaques and other display items I'd seen earlier had been removed. Concivia began waving her arms about and chanting in Latin, making an invocation of some sort. One of the ravens pulled the curtain aside, revealing the ancient stone Tartactony, now the only piece of art on display from the original Mithraeum, mounted on the wall behind the altar, just as in the days of old. Consivia turned and faced me directly. Criphius, have you any dispatch from the Mount of the Gods? This was a test, I knew. Again, they wanted me to prove my psychic abilities. I tried to clear my mind so that I could hear that same strange voice that had told me about the wardrobe room. Tell me what to say, I asked mentally. To my relief, a reply came quickly. Bring forth the bull of the world. Give its blood and seed to the Virgin, my queen. I repeated these lines to the priestess, and then she repeated part of it as well. She shouted to the back of the room, Bring forth the bull and the queen of heaven. At that moment, one of the two doors acting as the main entrance to the Mithraeum swung open. A man with a waning moon veil led a black bull on a rope through the door and down the wheelchair-accessible ramp into the temple. The bull was draped with laurel crown and a red tasseled scarf on its back. On top of this Philippine rode side saddle, her veiled head slumped in front of her. When they got to the altar, two waning moon butchers grabbed the girl and slid her down from the bull. All three then went to stand with the rest of the butchers. Another took the reins from Miles, who walked back to the front doors, now closed, and stood before them, facing the altar while holding his gun out in front of him as before. A raven came and stood near the altar, holding a modius full of grain. Then Consivia spoke to me again. Now, Criphius, come stand before the altar. I hesitantly stepped forward, trembling. A lion brought forth one of the censers, now burned down to nothing but smoldering charcoal. She stuck her finger in the ashes and drew a circle between my eyes. Then she put a dot in the middle. Now with your mind's eye, do you see what is in store for your own near future? She asked. Again, I couldn't see anything, but I heard an answer from the robot voice, with a very disturbing message. This is going to hurt a lot, it said. Oh shit, I said as the floor beneath my feet gave way. I fell through the trap door and into a stone pit, landing hard on both legs, which both snapped on impact. I screamed as my body crumpled beneath me. Bones stuck out of both ankles. Blood poured out. I moaned and cried pathetically. I shook and convulsed uncontrollably, going into physical shock. WHWH, what are you going to do to me? I was stuttering because I was hyperventilating. But of course I knew what was coming, more or less. The pit was about 6 feet deep. It was round and small, barely big enough to sit in, except that in front of me there was a hallway the width of a man, which I could not see the end of. I could hear well what was going on above me. As my sobs grew quieter, Consivia began intoning an incantation above me. Spirit of the world, come into the body of this horned creature. Accept the grain offering. Eat! I heard the bull's hooves scraping against the stone floor. I heard it snort as it most likely began to eat the grain, probably offered upon the altar in the style of the Greek Bouphonia ritual. That meant the hunters would now be sneaking up behind it. And if Rosenberg was playing the role of Mithras in this syncretistic ritual which they had devised, then it was probably his lance that would do the slaying. I heard the bull lowing while men were shouting and grunting. Then I heard the voice in my head again. Close your eyes. I obeyed the order as the bull's blood came pouring down upon me. It was a kosher slaughter, so it took a few minutes for the animal to bleed out, during which time I continued to hear grunting. This was followed by a loud gasp of exultation just as the flow of blood was slowing to a halt. This told me that the tradition of sodomizing the bull while it died was being carried out by someone in the group. Now, I don't know what was the worst part. The sounds the poor creature made as it died, the feeling of the disgusting ooze dripping on my face, or the horrible stench. Thoughts of mad cow disease and intestinal parasites came to mind, but none of it distracted from the pain in my legs for more than a few seconds. I wiped the blood from my eyes with the sleeve of my robe. Then I looked up and saw Consivia staring down at me from above. Now you have been baptized with a blood niptron. You should be able to see more clearly. Quite the opposite. Not only was there still some blood stuck in my eyelids clouding my vision, but my eyes, already swollen from crying, were also starting to itch and sting in reaction to the bacteria in the raw blood. But I wasn't the only one crying. Philippine, whose only known personality trait was her love of animals, was becoming hysterical. She was under the influence of the poisoned bird from dinner, but she was still herself, and she was being severely traumatized by the sight of this. Although I suspected not at all for the first time. However, she would not remain herself for much longer. Consivia began Consivia began another invocation, even as the knives of the butchers could be heard ripping into the bull's flesh. Virgin Mother, Queen of the Night, come hither into the vessel of this female body that stands before this altar. Come forth and accept the bollocks of this bullock, the world. Take into your mouth the sacred germ of secular living. Feast. The room above me suddenly became illuminated with a new light. It was not torchlight, but a soft blue glow, like natural moonlight. It traveled from the southwest side of the temple to the altar, floating over the aperture above me along the way. I say floating because when I finally got a look at it, I saw that it took the form of a sphere. When it passed over me and onto the altar, I heard Philippine gasp. I then heard yowling, like that of a cat, and the hissing of a lizard or a snake. This was following by gurgling, ravenous chewing and swallowing. The gore of the bull's severed testicles was undoubtedly being poured into her mouth. I heard more ripping of flesh with knives and the cracking open of bones. Then there was a rattle of chains and muffled screams from the girl, sounding human again. After that there was a moment of silence, just long enough for me to hear the faint sound of an insect stridulating. I looked directly in front of me. There was a scorpion, blonde-colored and about 1.5 inches long, standing about 2 feet from my disfigured legs with its pincher prone. I tried to scoot back away from it using my hands, but I was already pretty much up against the wall. It started running towards me, and I closed my eyes. Then I heard a footstep and a crunch. I opened my eyes and saw one of the lions standing in front of me, holding an iron ring full of skeleton keys in a disfigured old white hand. He had stomped the scorpion beneath his light brown leather cap-toe Oxford shoe. "Leopold?" I said, just as the onerous music started up again in the temple above me. He looked upwards through the trap door, at nothing, then lifted up his mask briefly, revealing the expected familiar face of the devious old con man. He winked at me, then put the mask back down. He knelt down beside me and pulled out a syringe. I screamed, "No!" I turned away from him as far as I could, and tried to wrench my arm away from him as he grabbed it. He held tight. He whispered in my ear, "Be quiet and stop struggling. I'm trying to help you. Now be still. I don't want to hurt you. I'm already in agony." I snapped. "That's why I'm giving you morphine," he replied through clenched teeth. My struggle subsided. Within seconds I could feel that the injection did indeed contain opiates, ameliorating my suffering. I accepted it. Maybe they'll chop me up and eat me bit by bit while I'm still alive, I thought to myself. At least with the drugs it won't hurt as much. I slumped back and allowed myself to be dragged without struggle several feet down the dark hallway. Then Leopold picked me up and heaved me into a chair. It was a wheelchair. He blindfolded me again. I felt the chair dragged backwards some distance. Then he turned the corner and was able to turn the chair around so that he was pushing it forward. I felt us going up a ramp, turning and turning for several minutes. Then we straightened out again, went across a hallway, and stopped in front of a door. Leopold tapped on it 9 times, 6 short ones and 3 long ones. The door opened, and I smelled the incense. The Gothic organ music played, and the boys chanted in Latin as we rode down the wheelchair ramp of the Mithrium's proper entrance. At the bottom, he removed my blindfold. The music stopped. Consivia addressed me. "Gryphius, you have been hobbled to prevent you from running away, for you are a slave to us. You will now be set forth before your master, to whom you shall genuflect in obeisance." "How am I supposed to get down on my knees when I can't even stand?" I said, quivering. But even as I spoke, ravens were lifting me up and placing me on my knees. I had to fall forward on my hands and hold my broken legs up behind me with great effort to keep them from bearing weight against the ground. "That just makes it easier to fall on your face," said Rosenberg, behind his mask of Mithras. He now stood in front of me, and in front of the altar, now displaying the eviscerated carcass of the sacrificed bull split down the middle and cracked open. Despite the incense, which itself was an unpleasant smell, the room was still full of the most god-awful stench from the dead animal. Rosenberg stated his demand. "Do you promise to serve me without reservation henceforth, to do everything I ask, to submit to every humiliation, while also offering me your best efforts on the tasks I set for you, giving me true and complete information on every question I lay before you, and accepting a price worse than death if you fail in this?" "Yes," I said in a cracked voice full of desperation. How is this a bargain? I have no choices and nothing to negotiate with, I thought to myself. Rosenberg then stepped aside from the altar, and 2 torch-bearing lions stepped out to shine their fiery lights ahead of me so that I could see what was on the ground in front of it. There was a bloody pile of meat, specifically a string of intestines, now just a foot away from my face. Then Rosenberg spoke again. Here are the entrails of the sacrifice, sitting in the exact state in which they fell from the victim's body. Within the bowels of this beast you should be able to see the location of the keystone we are seeking. Can you see it? The ravens raised me up a couple of inches. I looked at the guts. I couldn't help but notice that the manner in which they were arranged resembled the trefoil spiral staircase of the building we were in. And right in the center of the pile, at the end of the hose, there was something red and shiny like a ruby, its bright glow visible through the slime-covered flesh. I swear it looked like the Superman logo. Yes, I can see it, I said. Can you? He looked down at the pile of intestines. He was silent for a while, breathing heavily behind his mask. Then at last he looked at me and spoke. That's what I have you for. Can you remember exactly what you see here? We'll need to use this information later on in the rites. Well, I don't have a photographic memory if that's what you're asking, I said. Why don't you take a picture? He said nothing for a moment. You said you wanted accuracy. I'm in pain and on morphine. You'd best take a picture. There's a cell phone in the pocket of my jacket underneath my robe. It might still have some juice left. Rosenberg laughed at that. I'll do it myself, he said. But thank you for reminding me about your phone. He reached into his pocket and took out his own phone, then tapped the side to open the camera function. He framed up the shot and activated the flash. In the dark cave, the sudden burst of light was blinding. Ravens, remove the lady's phone from her jacket, please, and open up the photo gallery, he said to the men holding me. The raven on my right hiked up my robe and fumbled in my jacket pocket for the phone, unnecessarily squeezing my right breast in the process. Stop it, you pig! I objected, Rosenberg chuckled. So then did several others. Miss Auger, genuflection is ultimately a sign of sexual submission made into a societal custom. It's an evolutionary vestige of our wild bestial ancestors. The animals do it whenever they lose a fight, or whenever they don't even dare to fight. It was first practiced by human tribes conquered in war, to obtain mercy from the victors. Then it was made a general sign of respect from slaves to their owners. Why do you think Muslims put their asses in the air when they submit to Allah? The raven with the phone held it out in front of me while his partner now took control of both of my legs. What's the swipe code? The raven with the phone asked. It's the sign of Jupiter, I answered. Huh, he said. It's like a number 4, I said. He took off his white glove and tried to draw a 4 with his finger on the cover of the phone. It didn't work, so he took off his mask and squinted at the phone in the torchlight. I saw that it was Drexella's pimple-faced, greasy-haired son, Dennis. I put all of my weight on my left hand and reached out to draw the swipe code on my phone with my right hand. I got in at once and then hastily put my right hand down again so that I wouldn't fall forward. Even with the morphine, the muscle strain from hanging there and the pain from the injury was unbearable. Hey, the phone's at 3%, boss, Dennis said as he handed the phone to Rosenberg. Want me to plug it in somewhere? In a minute, he said as he looked at the screen. Can I sit down now? I pleaded. Rosenberg nodded and waved in our direction, giving his assent. Then he looked at the phone again and gasped. You already have a photo of raw meat on your phone. What is this for? What do you mean? I said. I hoped that I wouldn't be struck by lightning for violating my oath to be truthful to him. I also hoped that my phone being almost dead would buy me some time before I had to give him an explanation. I didn't know exactly what the relationship was between Rosenberg's Mithras cult and Leopold's butchers, but if Rosenberg didn't already know everything about the bull liver at Stratford Place, I wasn't going to volunteer to tell him. Any information gap between me and him, I thought, is a strategic advantage. My hope was well-founded. With the phone at 3%, he couldn't open up the image gallery to see the detail. The phone just shut down when he tried. He rebooted it, but it immediately shut down again as soon as he opened the gallery. Fuck, he yelled, and almost threw the phone across the room. Then he stopped himself and handed it to Dennis. Plug it in, he told the lad, no doubt regretting that this was the one room in the building where he'd decided, out of respect for history, not to put phone chargers everywhere, or indeed any electrical outlets whatsoever. He signaled to the boy at the piano, who began playing an unsettling line of notes in repetition. The ravens set me down on the ground with my feet out in front of me. Then Dennis went out the front entrance to plug the phone in while the other raven dragged me to the nearest of the 14 pillars in the temple. He sat me on the first stone bench on the right side and propped me up with my back against the pillar second from the altar, so that the altar was in front of me. Then someone else who I couldn't see came up from behind me and wrapped a heavy iron chain around my body, fixing me in position. My arms were pressed tight against my sides, and my back was firmly against the pillar. "So, Criphius," said Conchivia, addressing me from behind the altar, "part of your duty is to help us determine the correct order of operations for the rest of the rituals. We should not have to tell you what the purpose of the rituals is. Which of the archons should be we invoke next?" Well, I didn't get an answer from my telepathic informant, but it seemed only obvious to me. Events like this always start with an orgy of rape, followed by an orgy of murder involving even more heinous forms of rape. Erotic rites precede rites of sadistic violence, but the longer the preliminaries could be stretched out, the longer the murders could be postponed. That wouldn't make the rapes any less difficult to watch, or make me feel any less responsible for what happened to the victims, but it seemed like the least harmful choice. "Invoke first the archon of lust," I answered. "Yes!" the crowd hissed. Like serpents, Conchivia nodded and raised her shepherd's crook, then used it to gesture to the girl in the black-laced veil, who, I now saw, was chained to the pillar opposite from me. "Now, Luna, lay down upon the altar, within the carcass of this beast, and let your brothers make you pregnant with the seed of a new aeon," declared Conchivia. A raven came to unlock her chains. He unfastened her robe and let it fall to the ground, so that she stood there naked and shivering. Then he led her to the altar, where she obligingly laid down in her bed of raw meat, sobbing piteously. The raven then began wrapping the chains around the carcass to strap the girl to it. Her legs were positioned so that the chains held them open, with her vagina gaping open and easily accessible from the left side of the altar. The black curtain was now covering the wall behind the altar once more. Now one of the ravens pulled it back again, revealing this time, instead of the tortoctony, another curtain, made of red translucent linen, into which an inverted cross, the cross of St. Peter, had been cut. Through the cross-shaped hole, something else displayed behind the curtain could be seen mounted on the wall. I recognized it as one of the broken pieces of the relief of Dionysus that had been found in the original Mithraeum. This was the section with only his naked rear end. I didn't know it at the time, but I now realized that the image before me, of the backside of Dionysus seen through the inverted cross cut into the curtain, looked just like Man Ray's picture monument à Daf de Sade, which he used as a cover for his personal edition of Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom in 1933. "Master of the Nymphi, come forth before the altar," Conchivia called to the back of the room. There, seated on the stone bench at the back with several of the young veiled boys, was the only grown man wearing such a costume, Crispin Martina. He rose and did as he was told, standing with tall, proud sensuality in front of the altar. The priestess watered him with lustrations from her aspergillum, then laid her hand upon his head. "Aphrodite, Queen of Harlots, come now and be joined in marriage with our father. Come into the body of this young man, and enjoy the double pleasure of the tunnon of air, the pole betwixt the serpents. Fuck and be fucked! To you we will give the first taste of the flesh of our beautiful young boys of high birth, and of our virgin royal queen. To you we will also give the pleasure of penetration from the rod of our father, Lady Venus. You who were born from the foam of the phallus upon the waters of feminine desire, yet who burns with the fire of male ferocity, come forth and take your fill of the distinguished charity of mate." That last phrase, if you'll recall, came right out of my commissioned translation of Hammer Purgstall's Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum, where he wrote that he found it encoded on a former Templar site in Bavaria. No other published work besides mine had utilized that phrase in English. My work is being used to write lines for elite rape rituals, I thought, with horror. It was so unbelievable, yet it was happening before me. Next, I saw a yellow-white ball of light emerge from within the well in the southwest corner of the room, which had, in the original Mithraeum, been connected to the Walbrook River underground. Little did I know at the time that the Walbrook had already been re-irrigated surreptitiously by Rosenberg and his friends, so it was presently floating back through the site we stood on down to the Thames once again. The light ball then glided across the room, hovered over Crispin's head for a moment, and then swiftly entered through the crown of his skull. I saw his face and neck become flush, his sweat poured down his forehead. Concivia took a step backwards, and Rosenberg stood before Crispin. "Harlot, kneel before our father," Concivia commanded. The young man did so. Rosenberg split open his robe in front, then stepped forward and pulled the veil over Crispin's head. He shoved his crotch in Crispin's face and was eagerly serviced by the man, now possessed by the goddess of love, or rather, strange love. After a minute, the father pulled out, and the priestess proclaimed, "I now pronounce you the bride of the Father. Let us all enjoy the harlots of the temple in the spirit of the Archon of Lust. Come forth, Nymphae!" With that, all of the boys and veils stepped into the center of the temple. There they were seized upon by the older participants. These men and one woman dragged them off to the stone benches between the columns on the sides of the chamber and had their way with them. Only one of the ritual's participants opted out of the child rape, Concivia. She stood behind the altar with her eyes closed, praying in tongues and making the cross sign with her hands every few minutes. Marcia squatted with her robe hiked up over the face of a 12-year-old. I had lost track of where Leopold was in the room, but I certainly didn't see him standing on the sidelines. Miles seemed to have left the room. Almost everyone was fully engaged in either raping or being raped. This included Rosenberg, who, after being formally married to his boyfriend in a bizarre rite of sexual subjugation, extended his hand as if in friendship to the man on the floor. He helped him to his feet but then spun him around and held him from behind. Rosenberg pulled up the young man's robe, exposing his erect penis, which he stroked a few times. The pater then gestured to one of the nymphae, about 10 years old, who was already servicing one of the lions. The boy immediately stopped and came over to attend to Crispin's now throbbing member. The man howled in bestial ecstasy and leaned back on Rosenberg to support his weight. After about a minute of this, Rosenberg pushed Crispin towards the end of the altar, where Philippine lay strapped inside the bull carcass. The young man shoved himself into her body and began thrusting as she screamed. Then Rosenberg pulled up the back of Crispin's robe and inserted himself into the young man's buttocks. Beneath the weight of the daisy chain, the bull carcass cracked a bit more, but it still held its general shape with the help of the chains. As the nymphae were both the prostitutes and the musicians, and they were presently employed, the only soundtrack for this rite of debauchery was the screaming and the moaning of the participants, the sounds of their bodies slapping together, the slurping sounds of fellatio and analingus. The odor of sex, and anal sex in particular, aided with the cans of Lyle's golden syrup that were being passed around the room for lubricant, mixed with the smell of incense and dead animals into a sickening perfume. That, the morphine, and the shock of the physical pain, as well as the sight of the meat on the altar and the rape of the young, was enough to cause me to vomit right next to the place where I sat chained helplessly watching. The smell of my own vomit made me want to vomit more, which I did. Though they seemed to transgress every sexual barrier, I noticed that the modern Mithrists did observe one restraint. All of the males were quite careful about where their seed went. Most had their semen collected into metal bowls that were passed around. This included the boys, all of whom, it seemed, were successfully milked for this purpose. These bowls were then emptied into 2 large Greek-style craters that stood on either side of the altar about 2 feet away in front of it. Wetzel and Rosenberg, however, pulled out before they got to that point and gave themselves a cold niptron, Rosenberg's words, from the amphora of holy water that sat next to the altar, cooling off their excited genitals. Rosenberg asked his friend to help wipe off his penis, and he seemed more than happy to comply. He then stood next to Crispin, rubbing his backside and promising him divine progeny as the young man pumped his semen into Philippine. "You shall sire us a new god of love, a new Eros who will come forth from the egg of a new eon. I shall name him Cupidonus," Rosenberg cooed. "Why can't I name him?" said Crispin, turning towards Rosenberg as he finished his orgasm. "I want to name him after my father." "Silence!" shouted Rosenberg. Before Crispin could react, Rosenberg grabbed him by the throat and pushed him back into the center of the room with the others. Then he pointed directly at me. "Criphius, whom shall we invoke next?" This time I was too sick and weary to think up a good answer. My first choice had been made strategically to save or at least extend people's lives, hopefully long enough for someone to come along and save us. But now the first wave of orgies had passed, and it was time for me to make another decision. Rosenberg wanted me to use my sixth sense to find the answer, so that was what I decided to sow. In the moment of relative silence he allowed me, I cleared my mind as best I could and put out the question to the voice that had spoken to me before. I received an answer, which I repeated verbatim without thinking. "Let Ares come forth to play blood sport and enjoy the caresses of Aphrodite, as he is wont to do." There was a logic at work here. Each of the gods invoked so far had been baited with something they found irresistible. Ares, aka Mars, was a god of warfare, rape, and pillage. He was also famous for fornicating with Aphrodite, aka Venus, despite her marriage to Hephaestus, aka Vulcan. "Yes, let him come forth," said Rosenberg. "I've always preferred the purity of hatred to love and death to sex. Marcia, if you please, march yourself up to the altar here." From the right side of the room, where she had sat being serviced by boy prostitutes, Marcia Martina arose, with her Roman helmet still on, but with the visor up, so that her face was visible. She grinned from ear to ear and stared lustfully at her son, who looked back at her with dread. Consivius sprayed her with the aspergillum, and a lion wafted her with incense again. Then one of the ravens pulled away the curtain with the satanic cross of St. Peter and brought forward a curtain displaying a Greek-style tapestry. From my position I could see that it showed a number of ancient battle scenes, including soldiers spilling out of a large wooden horse. The Trojan War, I thought. I then understood that the curtain had been made to represent Penelope's tapestry from Homer's Odyssey, the one she supposedly never finished. Rosenberg stepped into the center of the room and began bellowing out a speech. "Lord Mayor Marcia Martina, for centuries your family has been the keeper of the holy buckler of our temple. It was this sacred object that the site where we now stand, Bucklersbury, was secretly named for, as only the initiates of our esteemed syndicate know. This powerful talisman is represented on your family's arms, and reference to it can be found in the current incarnation of your family's name." She nodded her assent, as if to say, "This much I know. As the patrons of soldiers, your family has lent your wealth to assist in many great pageants of honor and valor, of bloodshed and rape. Your gold has been spent to pour the water of life upon the earth, and she has thirstily drunk it up. With your help, Britannia's enemies have been conquered many times, creating an empire where the sun never dies, shielding her with your strength. Even now, as the aegis of the empire has been occulted from the eyes of the profane, you and your kin have continued in this service." She nodded again, now with a bit of curiosity in her eyes, like she wondering where this was going. Then a raven pulled back the tapestry to reveal a display of 12 heavy metallic shields mounted on the wall, painted red, all of different shapes and sizes. One of them, however, was in the shape of the Superman logo. It was placed in the center of the arrangement. Rosenberg continued his speech. "Now, Lord Mayor, if you are fit to be the scion of your seed, the one who shall wear the mantle of great Mars, the captain of all armies, please walk up to the wall and take up the buckler of your esteemed heritage." Marcia seemed confused at first, then scared. She turned around and looked at me for help. I looked at the ground and tried to blank out my mind. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't about to save her ass. So she walked up to the wall behind the altar and started guessing. It was like watching someone playing Plinko on The Price is Right, trying to guess the correct digit. First she gravitated towards the one that looked like the shape of the shield of the Rothschild coat of arms. This was in fact the one that looked most like every heraldic shield you've ever seen. Then she reviewed the field of choices again and settled on a much smaller one, which looked like the small round buckler that formed the central jewel on the Rothschild arms. This is the one that actually represented the red shield of popular lore. It was this symbol that Mayor Amschel Rothschild supposedly used as a logo for his currency exchange business in Frankfurt. This is what the family was allegedly named after, according to mainstream historians. But now, I knew better. They were named after another object, some kind of talisman. Bucklersbury, the old name for the intersection of streets where the Mithraeum and New Court both stood, had been named after this object, probably long before the Rothschilds officially took residence there. I was certain that it took the shape of the Superman logo, although I had no idea what that meant. So Marcia had taken the wrong shield from the wall, albeit the logical choice. But she didn't possess the secret gnosis that I had been given quite accidentally. She would pay the price for this mistake eventually, but not right away. Rosenberg preferred to play with her first. She stood with her left hand inserted into the handle of the buckler and stared at Rosenberg. Now what? Rosenberg turned to Consivia. "Priestess, please, invoke the Archon of War," he said. Consivia motioned for Marcia to come stand with her before the altar. Then she laid her hand upon the woman's brow and spoke commands into the ether. "Lord Ares, come into this vessel of power. Enjoy with us the fruits of incarnation. Feel the glory of killing in the flesh for yourself once again, as you help us initiate the greatest bloodbath the earth has ever known. You can be the general, and you can call out the first shot." Suddenly we heard the ringing of a cell phone with a 99 Luftballons ringtone. Marcia, startled, fumbled inside her robe with her right hand and pulled out her phone. She then stared at it in excited astonishment. "Oh my goodness," she said, as if she had any goodness. "It's the Lord High Admiral. He only calls when there's a war on." As she spoke, an orange-red ball of light came up out of the well in the corner, just like the one before, and flew across the room, straight into Marcia's skull. She then became possessed of a spirit even more demonically evil and sadistic than the one she already called her own. When she answered the phone, she spoke with a masculine, guttural voice. "Hello, sir." "Yes. I'm fine, sir. I have a sore throat." "Yes, of course. Go ahead. Fire the torpedo. We'll help you pay for the aftermath, like always. Don't worry." She hung up and distractedly tried to hand her buckler and phone over to Rosenberg. "Father, hold these for me, please," she said, staring wantonly at Crispin. Rosenberg jerked his hand away in disgust and motioned for one of the ravens to take the items instead. Hands now free, she ripped open her robe and her blouse, squeezing her shriveled old breasts. Then she grabbed Crispin and kissed him passionately on the mouth, rubbing his chest and grasping his limp penis between her bony fingers. The young man seemed revolted at first, but, overcome with his lingering possession by the Archon of Lust, he succumbed to her caresses and began to regain his erection. Marcia then decided to sit down on the stone bench on the wall opposite from the pillar where I was chained. She laid back on the large cushion behind her and had Crispin kneel with his head between her legs. I had a perfect view. I couldn't help but stare in horror. The son dutifully began stimulating his mother's clitoris with his tongue, as I suspected he had done many times before in less ritualized and divinely inspired circumstances. She admonished him not to be too hasty. Then she closed her eyes and let out an intense moan that turned into a growl. After a few minutes, she told him to stop. She regained her composure temporarily and issued a command to the other people wearing Roman helmets like hers. "Soldiers, take up your spears and shields and divide yourselves into 2 even rows." The soldiers all looked at Rosenberg, who stood next to the altar. He nodded his agreement. Obediently, they all grabbed bucklers from the wall behind the altar, and spears, which were mounted right next to them. None, I noticed, chose the Superman logo-shaped shield, perhaps because it was so peculiar. Then they stood at attention in 2 rows, with 4 men each. There was a row of men on either side of her bench, staring across to each other, awaiting instructions. "Fight the man across from you until either he or you are dead." There was a moment of hesitancy. The men looked at each other from behind their masks, but it only lasted for a few seconds, as Rosenberg appeared to have no objection. To the contrary, he issued a complimentary command to the nymphess, whose job it was to play the drum. "Give me a drum beat, please. Something appropriate for a soldier marching to war." The nymph nodded and began tapping out a furious beat. One of the guys in the middle of the row, on my right, struck out at the man across from him. Then all hell broke loose between the 2 teams. Blood was flying everywhere. An ear got sliced off and landed in front of me. Marcia looked on at the spectacle in satisfaction and leaned back again. Crispin resumed his work. Within a couple of minutes, 4 men were dead, and Marcia looked like she was about to climax. She was laying diagonally on the bench now, arching her pelvis up towards Crispin's mouth as he slurped away. "Now fight each other until there's only one of you," she gasped in a raspy, demonic voice. Caught up in the frenzy of battle by this time, nobody questioned the order. It took a few more minutes for these more competent soldiers to be cut down. During this time, Marcia had her son remove his mouth several times for a few seconds and then resume his work. She seemed to be timing her orgasm until the last kill of the combat was made. When this occurred, she began jerking spasmodically, yelling, "Hurrah! Hurrah!" while the victor stood before her, with his spear held high over his head, panting and sweating nervously. He was obviously still terrified for his life, even though he'd won. The drummer boy had just finished his set, but a new set of knocks was heard coming from the doors of the front entrance. One of the ravens went to open it, as Marcia stood up and closed her robe. It was Miles. He walked in and raised his hand to signal Rosenberg. In so doing, he exposed his gun, which was holstered in his belt on the front of his body. Marcia, seeming to react on instinct, seized it on sight. Miles just stared at her, taken aback at her brazenness. She turned around and pointed the gun at the victorious sole surviving soldier. "Well done, you brave young man. You've earned some metal on your chest." And with that, she shot him in the left breast. He fell over, emitting vacuous gasps of air from the hole in his lungs as blood sputtered out of his mouth. "Ah, yes, that was great," yelled Marcia. She began goose-stepping around the room happily. Behind her, Miles cleared his throat loudly and then spoke past her to Rosenberg. "Father, sir, 2 of our brothers have arrived late, unexpectedly, with a little one in tow. Tell them to go home." "We can't be interrupted now," replied Rosenberg. "How rude and careless of them. Our elect ones should know better than that." "These brothers are very important," Miles added. "Oh, then who are these supposed VIPs?" he asked, laughing. "You know that Mithras is no respecter of persons. The Duke of Rothesay, sir, and Baron Carrickfergus, and little St. George." A collective gasp went through the room. It seemed that everyone present was both familiar and impressed with the code names mentioned. It wiped the smile off Marcia's face. She sat down on the bench next to her son, both of them now looking very serious. Only Rosenberg was unmoved. He walked over and took the gun away from Marcia, who handed it over without objection. "Is that so? Well, that is impressive. Nonetheless, I'm not sure we can dispose of one form of decorum for another." Prompted by my telepathic informant, I interrupted, projecting my voice as far as I could. "Let them come hither, for 3 kings are destined to bow down before the new sun." Rosenberg turned and looked at me through his mask. He cocked his head to the side, confused. Then he walked up to me and whispered, "But don't we have to finish the rite tonight first? I believe the hour is getting late. And these are the ones who have been called to finish the rite. Some of the actors you have chosen do not fit the role." I spoke quietly, and I no longer sounded like myself. My voice took on a seething quality, raspy and inhuman, as if I too had a hole in my lung, just like the poor soldier who gurgled out his last spit of blood on the floor in front of me. Rosenberg took it all in, then nodded. "Go ahead, Miles, let them join us. But see that the 2 brothers are properly suited according to their grades in the order. As for the little one," he looked at me, as if waiting for a judgment from me about what to do with little St. George. Apparently, this was a child too young to be a brother, in an order that admitted boys as young as 7. He had been brought to a place where young boys were subjected to repeated homosexual rapes and made to be complicit in ritual murder. "How can I prevent them from bringing him into this pit of hell and abusing him here?" I asked my telepathic informant. "There is no way to save this child," the voice told me, "but let Miles sit with him in the main lobby for now." I repeated that last part to Rosenberg as a command from the realm beyond. "Don't worry," said Miles. "They're already in their costumes. I'll take care of the child." With that, he ducked out through the door, which he left slightly ajar. A moment later, 2 men in robes and masks, one a sun, the other a lion, came through the doorway, then walked down the hall, the lion leading the sun. The lion had salt and pepper hair. The son had short golden hair with a bald patch on top. They both came and stood before Rosenberg in the center of the room. "Well, brothers, it's nice to see that you finally decided to show up. I thought you were too busy to come tonight, despite my insistence that it would be the most important rite we have ever conducted." "Yes," said the lion. "Well, it has been an eventful evening. My father received a call from this building a few minutes ago that has initiated a very dangerous sequence of events. This country is now in a perilous international crisis. The Russian sub that was just torpedoed in the Strait of Dover may very well set off a nuclear war if we don't dial it back somehow. So we came here to talk to the very persons we believe to be fomenting this crisis, to ask them to back off, said the Sun Man, looking at Marcia and Crispin. We ask not only as representatives of the crown, but as your brothers in Mithras too. He nodded politely, with reserved deference towards Rosenberg. It was sort of a half-bow, as if showing respect for the leader of the order, but holding back full obeisance out of respect for his own position of authority. It reminded me of Barack Obama trying to bow to the King of Saudi Arabia, without looking like he was bowing. And for the sake of the goddess our mother, the lion added, making the same half-assed bow towards Consivia. Duly noted, Rothesay. Thank you, said Consivia, nodding back at him. So that's the Duke, I thought to myself. The other one must be Baron Carrickfergus. I wonder if he got his barony from the same place Leopold did. I was trying to think flippantly, to bring some levity to the situation for myself, but my gut told me that this Duke and Baron were not pretending. In fact, I got the feeling they were each just using some of their more minor titles for this occasion. Marcia now stood up, looking possessed by evil intentions rather than fear once again. She took what she thought was her family's hereditary buckler back down from the wall, and one of the spears, which she held in her right hand with the tip downward. Then she strode arrogantly over to where the two apparent aristocrats of high stature, self-identified as agents of the crown, were standing. She addressed herself first to the lion. You know, not only should you not interrupt a meeting in progress that you couldn't be bothered to show up on time for, the fact is, in this part of town, you're supposed to ask for my permission to cross the Pomerium. Not if Regina's still alive, he replied. I hear she isn't, said Marcia, bringing her spear up and pointing it in his face. And if that's true, you're putting the kingdom in a very precarious position by coming here, which means you're desperate. So what do you have to bargain with? Is that why you brought little St. George? Bring him out here. I love a Vienna sausage every now and then. She gnashed her teeth at him. Show some respect, said Rosenberg, grabbing the spear from out of the Lord Mayor's hand. Even possessed by the war god, the old woman's bony hands were no match for the strength of a man. He didn't even have to point the gun at her, and instead holstered it in his waistband beneath his robe before he took the spear. As her weapon slipped out of her grasp, Ms. Martina stumbled backwards and landed on her butt. I heard brittle bones snap. Osteoporosis is a bitch, I thought. Actually, what you're holding is a trinket, Rosenberg said sneeringly as he towered over her cowering body. It's for little boys and girls who like to dress up and play toy soldier. The real Hebrew talisman that turned Nathan Rothschild into the Leviathan of finance worldwide is something else entirely. But of course you don't have the subtlety of mind to understand that. Wetzel! Yes, the other man with the sun mask stumbled out from the shadows and stood dutifully before his master. Let the Lord Mayor and her son have a look at the explosive headlines that just hit the international news wires, Rosenberg instructed. Which ones? Wetzel asked. The nuclear threats from Russia or the financial news? No. First, the one about the video you just leaked to your contacts at the BBC, the pater specified. Wetzel reached into his robe and pulled out a smartphone. He pressed a few buttons and then turned the screen out towards where Marcia sat on the ground, looking aghast. Crispin got up and walked towards the screen, staring at it in horror, with his right hand holding his veil up on top of his head. Wetzel pressed a button on the side of the phone, and the sound became loud enough for us all to hear. It was a familiar sequence of words and sounds, ones we had just heard coming from Marcia moments earlier. We heard again the moans of ecstasy as her son pleasured her. Then a male TV presenter's voice could be heard, apparently narrating a series of clips. Another recording provided to our reporter by this anonymous source shows what appears to be the Lord Mayor in the same position with a male child, possibly as young as 12 from the looks of it. Marcia pushed her heavy metal helmet off of her head, and it landed with a loud clang on the floor. The presenter continued. Of course, we won't be showing you even doctored versions of that, as it does constitute child pornography and is illegal to possess. We've passed both videos on to MI5 for authentication. I hope those shots were tight enough to conceal our location, said Wetzel. Shh, said Rosenberg. Listen. The report went on. But the most heartbreaking thing is that this film and the first one we showed you with Crispin Martina were date-stamped with tonight's date, from less than an hour ago. That means that this sick party, where children are being abused, is potentially still taking place right now. Scotland Yard has confirmed that they are on their way to Mansion House with a warrant for the Lord Mayor's arrest. Good God, Blake, you'll get us all taken down. What have you done? Said Crispin. He reached in his robe, got out his phone, and began dialing a number. That is an extreme move, said the Duke of Rothesay to Rosenberg. We're all vulnerable when it comes to that sort of thing. It's supposed to be the bullet that never gets fired. Tell that to Jimmy Savile, said Marcia, opening up her own cell phone now. I'll be damned if I'm going to let you hang me out to dry like that. My family won't let it happen. Your family will be too busy scraping up whatever assets they have left and fleeing the countries they live in, said Rosenberg. While you were in this chamber having your smegma-covered cunt serviced by your sniveling son, the value of your family's wealth has evaporated. What good will mountains of gold do you when the volume of gold on the market has just been quadrupled, literally overnight? There was a collective gasp in the room, then a few seconds of silence. That's impossible, said Crispin. Our family holds over half of the world's gold. There's no way anyone could dump that much gold on the market without our participation. And we're not selling right now. That's okay, 'cause nobody's buying, Rosenberg retorted. Did you forget that you're talking to an alchemist? The eyes of both Martinas widened at the sound of that. They stared in disbelief. You can't be serious, said Marcia. He is, said Crispin, addressing his mother. He made it from the urine we've been getting from the throne in Westminster. He discovered the tubes in the tunnels, remember? Oh, fuck, she said, tearing her wig off and revealing the gray hair underneath, with a significant bald patch on top. And I've got a process that produces in much more abundance than what you and your ancestors have been doing, said Rosenberg. I know the true secrets of multiplicatio, not just confidence tricks. Because you've been harvesting semen from all your employees here for over a year, said Crispin, pacing back and forth frantically, through the robots and the glory hole in the Kafka, and from all of the orgies we've been having over at the coffin house over the last year, and the blood and guts of the victims, too. God, even the spinal fluids. I can't believe I didn't see what you were up to. I really believed you were looking for a source of free energy to help the earth. Oh, what I'm about to do will give the goddess of dirt exactly what she needs, and a source of power that will be inexhaustible. You see, Crispin, what she really wants is to be reunited with her lover, the sky, and that is the kind of love that we are making tonight. It's a strange love, a mad love, like the laugh of the hellworm that will not die. Isn't that right, Reverend Springhole? He turned around and looked at Consivia. She smiled at him and nodded. What the devil are you talking about? Asked the Duke of Rothesay. The devil you don't know, apparently, said Rosenberg. Never mind, you'll find out soon enough. The pater then turned back to Marcia and Crispin. So you see, Lord Mayor, you bitch of the parasitic, warmongering house of Rothschild, as much as I hate the sickly sweet love between low, plebeian souls, I actually hate hatred too, even more. Certainly we can do without the kind of revolutionary instincts that your family fosters to keep the war machine turning, because it weakens loyalty, quickens the pride, and stirs rebellion among the unworthy. He inhaled and exhaled deeply, pacing in a circle around the two Martinas. He continued. In the new eon, there will be no resistance to the Lord of Unrule. Remember what Zeus once said to Ares in the Aeneid? To his own despised son, he said, were you born of some other god, long since you would have been dropped beneath the gods of the bright sky. We don't need a war god under the new sun. Marcia turned to her son. Crispin, help Mommy up, please. The young man reached down, grabbed the injured old woman's arm, and began lifting her to her feet. She leaned on his shoulder, putting her weight on him. The young man reached down, grabbed the injured old woman's arm, and began lifting her to her feet. She leaned on his shoulder, putting her weight on him. But he reached out to Rosenberg for the spear, which his boss willingly handed over to him. Then Crispin placed the spear upside down with the tip of the handle pressed down onto the floor, and pushed his mother's body towards the blade. She fell upon it, and it went all the way through, skewering her through the heart. There was only time for her to utter a single wheeze before she closed her mouth forever. Crispin let the body fall to the floor as it expired. Then he turned to Rosenberg with a pleading look. Please just help me escape from this. I will be your most loyal servant, as I always have been. I'm willing to do anything. I'll even—" He paused to consider what he was agreeing to, staring off blankly at a far wall. "I'll even let the barber surgeons change my beautiful face if it means I can be released from the life of infamy that now stands before me." He looked like he was going to cry. "Your beauty is fading in any case, dear lover," said Rosenberg. "You're far too old, and your rectum is far too worn out for my taste these days." At this, tears were definitely welling up in the corner of Crispin's reddened baby blue eyes. Rosenberg continued his emotional torture. "But don't forget, I've got you on camera now too, diddling a 12-year-old girl, so why don't you give up now to avoid the humiliation? In the next eon, a new catamite will be born to me with the beauty of Ganymede." He sighed at the pleasure of this contemplation, then reached in his waistband and pulled out the gun. He offered it to Crispin, holding it by the barrel. Without a moment's hesitation, he put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger, spraying his brains all over Consivia behind him. The splatter reached the ceiling, too, as well as the wall and the altar where Philippine now lay silent and still on top of the rotting bull carcass. Some of the gore apparently sprinkled on the Duke's lion mask, even managing to penetrate the slit of the mask's mouth. He stuck his finger underneath the mask and we heard him lick his lips. Tastes like a Jew," the Duke said. Everybody in the room started laughing uproariously. "Hey," said Rosenberg in mock objection, chuckling underneath his Mithras mask. "I resemble that remark." More cachinnation followed. The Duke pulled off his mask, revealing his rat-like old face, proving that he was indeed the person I feared he was. Here's one of the most crucial figures in the kingdom, I thought, standing there exposing himself to incrimination that could destroy the crown itself, not to mention the threat of assassination. Yet he seems so perfectly comfortable, as though he still trusts in the honor among thieves. This even after he just watched two other very important figures cut down in cold blood before him. Even after he himself has just been threatened with a spear by one of them. Despite the fact that Rosenberg has shown himself to be indisputably the most powerful person in the room, with a financial weapon in his arsenal of an unimaginable magnitude, and completely disloyal to his so-called brothers, neither Duke nor Baron seem fazed at all. "So, my liege," said Rosenberg to the Duke, "can you call off your dogs at Scotland Yard before they start combing through every building on the block?" "Oh ho, old boy, they're not my dogs," the Duke said, replacing his mask. "Can you help me call off the dogs of war that the Lord Mayor unleashed?" "Yes, but this first," Rosenberg insisted. "If they don't find the Lord Mayor at Mansion House, they will surely go looking at New Court, and eventually they'll end up here. That's precisely why you shouldn't have leaked that video to the press. What were you thinking? Anyway, I can't be seen to interfere on this case, not with all the child sex charges still haunting Andrew. The order to quash must come from within Scotland Yard, or from within the security services. Don't you have connections at Thames House?" "I used to," said Rosenberg. Then he remembered. "Wait, yes!" He got out his phone and pressed a button, then spoke. "Yes, Miles? Please go fetch the man in the elevator at Newcourt and bring him to my office. I'll meet you there. Thank you." While the Duke and the Baron stood casually mumbling to each other, Rosenberg walked up to me to whisper another demand for instructions through divination. "So what's next?" he asked. "How should we proceed?" A voice from beyond seemed to take over my larynx in response to Rosenberg's prompting. I was ready for him. I had already received a message from my psychic informant. The seed of Venus was planted in the appropriate vessel corresponding to her sphere of influence. As for the others, let the three kings plant their royal seeds in her rose garden next door instead. Let the king with the highest rank have her first. Then let the Sunrunner's horses plow her field too. This will open a gateway between the two gardens, causing the seeds to commingle and graft together in a manner more than natural. It will also free her mortal soul and complete the rites for this evening. I really had no idea what these metaphors were about at the time. I think Rosenberg's understanding of them was vague and incomplete, or else he would never have gone along with the plan. "Horses? Where from?" he asked, incredulous. "Send a text with the Lord Mayor's phone to the Lord High Admiral the voice said through me. Tell him to come here with 4 horses and a chariot, with standing room for 2. He must inform none but his personal entourage where he is going, and may use only his most trusted assistants for this. He shall take the tunnels to be sure he isn't followed. Also tell him to bring the device he uses for mating with horses. He has a device for mating horses? Said Rosenberg, amused. Mating with horses. The voice I spoke with corrected him. Most certainly. Just letting him know that you know about it will be enough to ensure that he gets himself here right away. And you want us to squeeze 4 horses and a carriage in here? Rosenberg said skeptically. With all these other people? No, I replied. On the Sky Terrace at New Court. Make sure someone brings me another shot of morphine before we go. The informant's voice was confined to my mind now, allowing me to control my own throat again, but still feeding me the lines. So the Lion and the Sunrunner, whom I'd planned to use. What shall we do with them now? Asked Rosenberg. Continue to use the Lion as a servant, I said, hoping as I spoke it was worth it to save Leopold's life. But not Wetzel. He's finished his purpose. We shall add his blood to the hell broth in the Gradales and use his fat to make a flying ointment. Make sure it's prepared before the next ceremony begins. I felt no remorse. Wetzel was a child rapist and an accessory to murder, just like everyone else in the room. Also, from what I could tell, he was slated for sacrifice at the end of the ritual anyway. I just assumed that most of us were. I was just moving up his execution date one day, I figured. These were the instructions I had been given by my psychic informant, and I saw no reason to deviate from the message in any way. Now do the invocations before the Sunrunner's carriage arrives. I was told to say, "The Sunrunner's carriage?" Rosenberg said, second-guessing me. You mean the Lord High Admiral's carriage? He will be bringing it, but it's for the Sunrunner's use, I said with telepathic prompting. It is he who shall work those starry wheels. Have your servants outfit it with scythes for reaping. Rosenberg nodded. Anything else? Yes, the voice continued through me. Have them connect the Walbrook to the Rothschilds' royal pissing conduit at Bucklersbury, so that the spirits of the Archons can travel to Newcourt with ease. There is a piping system sufficient in diameter for our needs that you can access behind a locked door in the tunnels there at that junction. It can only be opened with Crispin's fingerprints, the right hand, and just the fingers of blessing. This pipe connects to the toilets in the skybox. Make an opening for them to get from the skybox toilets to the terrace below. It will serve as a divine portal for the right, like the well that you have here. Again, I did not understand the meaning of the words I was speaking. I reached for a picture in my mind of how this was going to play out, but was given only a blank screen. After receiving that last detail from me, Rosenberg promptly pivoted on his heels and called out to the men in the black leather veils standing at the back of the room. Butchers, please take the bodies of these soldiers down to the Gradalis room for processing. But leave the Lord Mayor and Crispin. Lay them down on the benches. We have special plans for them. Wait, said Baron Carrickfergus. First, I've got to take a leak. Dad, what do you say? He looked at the Duke and gestured towards the bodies of the 2 Martinas. Oh yes, splendid idea, said the Duke. My bladder is bursting. I've had a pint too many tonight. Both men walked up to the corpses which had fallen within inches of each other and opened up their own robes. Then I heard the unzipping of trousers and the splash of the urine as it hit its targets. The father and son walked in a circle around the 2 bodies so as to thoroughly drench each one. As they did so, they laughed. So you want my piss, do you? Said the Duke to the lifeless remains as he soiled them. There you go, bean counters. Drink your fill. Oh, how I'd love to do this to the rest of the family, said the Baron as the last of his urine stream sputtered out. You can, said Rosenberg, but it's not necessary. They shan't be bothering you much anymore, now that my economic plan is taking effect. Still, I wish you'd have let me piss in their mouths while they were still alive, these 2, said the Duke, shaking off the final drops. They were worst. I never understood what you saw in that boy, other than his pretty mouth and his tender arse. Rosenberg chuckled and shrugged his shoulders. What else do you need, right? But seriously, I'll give you a better way to use your cocks for revenge against these two, besides pissing on their cadavers." Both the Duke and the Baron looked up and gave him their full attention. The moment Rosenberg hinted at an opportunity for vengeance-motivated debauchery, both men's penises hardened in their hands. "What have you got, Blake?" said the Baron eagerly. "Well, she's not much to look at," Rosenberg replied, "but she is the only biological heir to the corpses beneath you. Oh, and she's quite known to your family. She used to go with the Lord High Admiral for carriage rides and polo matches when she was a young lass. I've even seen you bouncing her on your knee a few times during those years, you old goat. And I let you do it." The Duke looked away from him as if ashamed. He continued, "I didn't mind. You see, my daughter was never really my daughter. Consivia and I merely helped the Martinas cover up something that would have been of great embarrassment to them." "But how can that be?" said Baron Carrickfergus. "She's only 12. So was Crispin when he got his mother knocked up." Rosenberg howled with merriment. Oh, how that pregnancy heightened his disgust for the female race, almost bringing it up to my level. He couldn't get hard for her any more after that, or any woman for that matter. I took the baby off their hands, knowing that she would come in handy someday. He walked up to the girl, still splayed and strapped to the decaying meat on the altar, and placed his left hand flat on her stomach. She flinched, the first sign of life I'd seen from her in a while. Rosenberg continued his speech. "And now, tonight, she is providing the material basis for the most ambitious magical working that any man has ever attempted. But I am inviting you, my lords, to aid me in this endeavor. Tonight, as part of this effort, Philippine will die in the midst of extreme pain and sexual degradation. The Lord High Admiral is already on his way here to lend some technical assistance. I would be much obliged if you two would play out the roles I have prepared for you." "You know very well that we are already obliged to you, so of course we will accommodate," answered the Duke, closing his robe. "Is she a virgin?" asked the Baron, now gently stroking his swollen member. "Not as of an hour ago," said Rosenberg with a slight hint of regret in his voice. "But the back door is what I'm going to hit. After you two, of course." "Oh, but let my son have first shot," said the Duke. "He's very particular about these things." "Of course, it's a deal," said Rosenberg, shaking the hands of both men in turn. "We'll be moving over to Newcourt for the next part of the operation." He looked down at his phone, which had just received another message. "But first, I must speak to one of my captives," he said in conclusion. Then he addressed the butchers, who had been standing there the whole time waiting for permission to take the bodies of the Martinas. He held up his right thumb, index finger, and middle finger. "Take the first 3 fingers from Crispin's right hand and save them for me," he instructed. "Then take the bodies and put them in the coffin house in pods 1 and 2. So the other building was intentionally made to look like a coffin, I discerned silently. The butchers complied with the orders. One of them snipped off the fingers with large meat shears. The others covered up the corpses with curtains. Crispin with the cross curtain, Marcia with the Troy tapestry. Then 4 more butchers came through the main entrance and carried the bodies away on gurneys. Before they arrived, Rosenberg had already gone, presumably to speak with Chesterfield, whom I took to be his captive, the MI5 contact he bragged to the Duke of Rothesay about. I swooned with exhaustion at the thought of what must still lay before us, before the night was even through, before I would be allowed to rest in the comfort of either sleep or, most likely, death, it seemed to me. Though it hadn't really been that long, I felt like I needed another shot of morphine. Just when I thought I couldn't take waiting any longer, Leopold showed up with the syringe in hand, giving me the only small comfort I would be permitted that night. Oh, and one other. He gave me a long draught of water from a stone amphora. I wished I could have drowned in it at that moment.